Hey friends! Glad you're here at Harryverse X. We've cooked up something special. What if Hades and Persephone adopted Harry at age 4 from cupboard and made him immortal god of death and spring? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1, The Cupboard That Spoke to Shadows. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4, Privet Drive was exactly 11 inches too short for a grown adult to stand in, 23 inches wide, and smelled permanently of damp wood and old boots. Harry Potter had measured it with his hands, pressing his small fingers against the walls the way other children pressed their faces against bakery windows. Not wanting to escape, exactly. Just wanting to know the shape of his world. He was 4 years old and he had already learned several important things. The first was that he should not ask questions. Questions made Uncle Vernon's face go the color of a bad plum and made Aunt Petunia's mouth press into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. The second was that Dudley's toys were Dudley's toys, even when Dudley had broken them and thrown them in the bin. The third, and this one Harry had figured out entirely on his own, through careful observation and a kind of bone-deep instinct that he had no words for, was that the shadows listened. Not always. Not the shadows in the kitchen or the harsh fluorescent blankness of the bathroom. But the shadows in here, in the cupboard, the deep pooling dark that gathered in the corners and under the broken shelf where Aunt Petunia stored tins of paint she'd never use, those shadows had texture. Wait. They moved when nothing else moved. And sometimes, when Harry was very quiet and very still and his stomach hurt from missing dinner, something in the dark would settle against him like a warm hand between his shoulder blades, and the cold would go away. He'd tried explaining this to Dudley once. That had been a mistake. Tonight was a punishment night. He'd come home from the park. He was allowed the park on Tuesday afternoons, supervised invisibility, Dudley and his friends running ahead while Harry trailed at the regulation 3 steps back, and a butterfly had landed on his finger. Just a small orange thing, wings like torn silk. Harry had stopped walking to look at it. It had stayed for almost a full minute, wings slowly opening and closing, and when Dudley's friend Piers threw a rock at it, the rock had stopped in midair. Harry hadn't done that. He was almost sure he hadn't done that. But the rock had hung there for a full, stuttering second before clattering to the pavement, and the butterfly had drifted away undamaged, and Piers had screamed, and now Harry was in the cupboard with no dinner and a bruise forming along his left ribs where Vernon had gripped him, hard, walking him inside. He pressed his back against the wall. The wood was cold. Outside, he could hear the television, some action film Vernon liked, explosions and men shouting at each other, and the clink of dinner being served without him. "It's all right," Harry said, to nothing in particular, in the quiet way he'd developed of speaking to the dark. "I'm not hungry anyway." The shadows shifted. Harry watched them. He'd gotten very good at watching shadows. This one moved differently than usual, not the slow settling drift of heat going out of a room, but something more purposeful, like water finding a drain. It pooled at the base of the cupboard door, thickened, and then, quite calmly, quite deliberately, it reached. Harry blinked. A tendril of absolute darkness, not the grey dark of an unlit room but real dark, the kind you could feel in your teeth, curled through the gap under the door. Not threatening. The way a cat extends a paw under a closed door, curious and proprietorial and entirely sure of itself. Harry extended one finger and touched it. The sensation was extraordinary, cold and warm simultaneously, like putting your hand into a river that had 2 temperatures flowing through it at once, and beneath it a hum, almost a vibration, that Harry felt behind his sternum rather than in his hands. Recognition. Like hearing your name called by someone who knew exactly who you were. "Hello," Harry said. The darkness pulsed once, gently, against his fingertip. The cupboard door opened. Not from the inside, the latch was on the outside, Aunt Petunia's practical solution to what she called Harry's wandering, but the latch lifted on its own, the hinges turned without protest, and the door swung smoothly back. The hallway beyond should have been familiar, the carpet runner in faded beige, the coat-rack with Vernon's good hat, the kitchen light spilling yellow from the gap under the door. And it was all of those things, technically. But it was also, simultaneously, something else. There was a depth to the shadows at the end of the hall that made the hall seem to go back much further than it should, and standing in that depth were two people who had not been in number 4 Privet Drive a moment ago and were now, quite plainly, simply here. The man was tall. Not aggressively tall, not cartoon villain tall, but genuinely tall, the kind of height that came with a gravity you felt before you registered it consciously. He wore dark clothes, not a costume, not a robe exactly, just clothes that were the color of deep water, and his face was the kind of face that had been carved out of some serious emotional moment and never quite relaxed from it. Jaw like a cliff face. Eyes the color of a clouded sky an hour before a storm. Dark hair, shot through with something that was either gray or silver depending on the light. He was looking at Harry with an expression Harry didn't have a word for yet. He'd learn the word later. It was recognition. The woman beside him was something else entirely. Small, shorter than the man by nearly a head, and composed of contradictions. Her hair was dark as winter soil but it had flowers in it, actual flowers, small white things, and they were alive and they were growing. Harry could see them growing, though he was fairly certain flowers didn't do that. Her eyes were green. The same green as Harry's, in fact, which was a strange coincidence that Harry filed away carefully. And her expression was not carved or controlled or anything so contained. It was wide open, grief and fury and something fierce and soft in equal proportion, and it was entirely, completely focused on him. Vernon Dursley, the man said, in a conversational tone that made the walls feel briefly uncertain of themselves, has 30 seconds to answer the door before I stop being polite about this. Vernon Dursley appeared in the kitchen doorway at 28 seconds, chip halfway to his mouth. He looked at the two strangers in his hallway. He looked at Harry. He opened his mouth. "Don't," the woman said pleasantly, "finish that sentence." Vernon's mouth closed. A remarkable achievement for a man who operated almost entirely on bluster. "Who are you?" Vernon managed, which considering his complexion had gone roughly the color of old wax, was almost brave. "How did you get in I own every house where death has visited," the man said, without moving, without raising his voice, without anything at all dramatic. Just the flat statement of a fact. "Every threshold where grief lives. Every place where fear is used to manage someone smaller. I've owned this house for 3 years." His gray eyes moved to Harry. "This boy's name is Harry Potter. He's our problem to manage, as per Albus Dump. He's 4 years old," the woman said, and her voice changed on the last word in a way that made the flowers in her hair bloom 3 additional blossoms simultaneously, "and he has a bruise on his ribs." "Finish the sentence." Vernon did not finish the sentence. Harry, watching from the cupboard doorway, became aware of several things at once. The first was that neither of these strangers frightened him. They should have. He'd learned fairly early that strange adults were not to be trusted, that the world was full of people who would look at him and see a burden, but standing here in Vernon's hallway, with the shadows puddling warmly around his feet, he felt precisely the opposite of afraid. The second was that the man had looked at him only once, just that single moment of recognition, and had not looked away since. Not in a frightening way. In the way that Harry sometimes looked at the butterfly today, like something rare and ordinary and perfect existing in the same moment. "You can come out," the man said, to Harry. Harry stepped out of the cupboard. He stood there in his 2 small pajamas, bare feet on the cold hallway floor, and looked up at the two of them. "The shadows talk to me," Harry said. "Were those yours?" The man's expression did something complicated, something cracked in it very slightly, like ice at the beginning of spring, and he crouched down, slowly, so he was at Harry's level. Up close, his eyes weren't one color at all. They had depth, the way water over dark sand has depth, and at the bottom of them something moved that Harry couldn't identify but felt like the sensation of putting your hand into a perfectly dark river. "Yes," the man said. "They were mine. You were talking to them, so I wanted to see." "I do that," Harry said. "Talk to the dark. Aunt Petunia says it's abnormal." "Aunt Petunia," the man said gravely, is wrong about most things. The woman made a sound. Harry looked at her and found she'd crouched down on his other side, and her eyes were doing something very similar to what the man's eyes were doing, which was being full of something that was too big for a hallway on a Tuesday night. I'm Persephone, she said. And this is Hades. We'd like to take you with us, if you'll come. Harry considered this. He looked at the cupboard. He looked at the two strangers. He looked at Vernon, who had gone so still he might have been a very ugly piece of furniture. Where? Harry asked. Home, Hades said, and the word had weight behind it, the kind of weight that a word gathers when it means exactly what it says. Harry had never heard anyone say that word like it was something real. Okay, Harry said. He didn't go back for anything. There was nothing in the cupboard worth going back for. What followed was not a dramatic departure. There was no flash of lightning or descent of shadows or theatrical exit. Hades simply stood up, looked at Vernon Dursley with the measured expression of a man who has decided to leave a consequence in place of an argument, and said, quietly, I'll be watching. And something in Vernon's eyes went out, not his life, nothing so final, just the specific species of cruel confidence that had lived there, and it never came back. Persephone picked Harry up. He let her. Her arms were warm and she smelled like growing things, green stems and dark earth and something floral that wasn't perfume but wasn't quite natural either. Harry, who had not been picked up with gentleness in memory, went rigid for approximately 3 seconds and then, with the decisive surrender of the very young and very exhausted, went entirely limp. She carried him out into the night. The street was empty. Orange lamplight. A cat sitting on a wall across the road, watching with the expression cats have always given to divine interventions. The night smelled of autumn leaves and something else beneath that, deep, cool, ancient, like stone and water and the particular silence of a room that has held many lives. Can you sleep? Persephone asked, walking. Yes, Harry said, from somewhere against her shoulder. Then sleep. It's a long way. Where are we going? Down, Hades said, beside them, and his voice had a quality of simple truth to it that Harry found oddly comfortable. And then home. Harry slept. He woke to a world made of light. Not sunlight, he would understand the distinction later, would understand that what he was seeing was the phosphorescence of the asphodel meadows, the soft eternal glow of a realm where the sun as mortals understand it had never burned. But at 4 years old, all Harry knew was that it was beautiful in the precise way that dreams are beautiful, both perfectly clear and somehow larger than it should be. He was lying in a bed. An actual bed, with actual sheets, dark blue, soft as he had no reference for, since the closest comparison he had was Dudley's sheets which he'd touched once and been shouted at for. These were different. These sheets felt like they were made for him, which was impossible, but 4-year-olds aren't particularly bothered by impossible. The room was generous and stone-walled, but not cold, warm, inexplicably, with that same river stone warmth he'd felt in Hades' eyes. The ceiling was high. At the single window, or what appeared to be a window, no sky showed, instead there was a slow movement of luminescence, shifting blues and greens, the colors of the deepest water. Persephone was sitting in a chair near the door. Good morning, she said. Or what passes for it here? Where is here? Harry asked, sitting up and looking around with the unself-conscious curiosity of a child who had decided, apparently in his sleep, that he wasn't frightened. The Underworld. She said it the way you might say the kitchen or the garden, a place you live in and love unremarkably. Hades' realm. Our home, most of the year. Are you dead? Harry asked. No. Are you? Harry checked himself. He felt more real than he could ever remember feeling, which was strange. No, he concluded. Then we're both alive in a dead man's kingdom, Persephone said, and smiled, and the smile was, Harry stored it carefully, the way he'd stored the feeling of the butterfly, the way he'd stored the weight of Hades' word home. It was the kind of smile that had a whole history behind it, that knew something complex was true and had made peace with the complexity. Hades is a god, Harry. So am I. Does that change things for you? Harry thought about it seriously. What kind of gods? Greek. Old ones. He rules the realm of the dead. I rule spring, and the growing of things, and the part of the year that doesn't belong to winter. Harry processed this. So the shadows are his. Yes. And the flowers in your hair are yours. Persephone touched the blossoms at her temple, looking pleased. Yes. Okay, Harry said. And then, in the same tone, what's for breakfast? Whatever Harry had expected from the following weeks, what he got was simultaneously more strange and more ordinary than anything his limited imagination had prepared him for. Breakfast was served in a dining hall that should have been oppressive, black stone, high ceilings, torchlight, but was actually just large and warm and full of the smell of food, real food, hot eggs and bread and fruit that had been grown somewhere where the growing was taken seriously. Hades ate breakfast across the table with the air of a man conducting several separate important thoughts simultaneously. He read while he ate, actual paper scrolls alongside something that looked suspiciously like a modern newspaper, the Elysian Herald, and he occasionally said things like, "Minus is being an idiot again," to no one in particular, and once, on the third morning, looked up from his reading, observed Harry carefully, and said, "You're staring." "You're interesting," Harry said. Hades looked at him for a moment with the complicated expression Harry was beginning to catalogue as something happening in his chest that he hasn't named yet. Then he said, "Eat your eggs," and went back to the Herald. Harry ate his eggs. He felt, for the first time in recent memory, that this was the correct sequence of events. Persephone took him on walks. The underworld, Harry discovered, was not what anyone would expect. Yes, there were the rivers. He met them all eventually, standing at the banks of the Styx with Persephone's hand warm around his and feeling the cold coming off the water that was not quite cold but the idea of cold, the universal understanding of a border you couldn't uncross. The Lethe. The Phlegethon, running with fire that didn't consume. The Acheron, which he liked best because it was dark and still and seemed, like the shadows in the cupboard, to be quietly paying attention. But there were also the Elysian fields, where the light had a quality Harry couldn't describe except that it made the air feel like exhaling after holding your breath too long. There were the meadows, endless and strange and populated by the soft movements of souls, who barely noticed Harry except occasionally one would turn, surprised, and look at him with an expression of faint recognition, the recognition of meeting something that shares your nature, Harry would eventually understand, the recognition of death recognizing one of its own. "They see something in me," he told Persephone, on the fourth day. "Yes," she said simply. "What?" She looked at him with that open, complicated expression. "What do you see when you look at yourself in water?" Harry had never thought to look at himself in water. He considered this. "I don't know. Come with me." She took him to a pool near the palace, still black water, not Lethe, not any of the named rivers, just a pool that existed in a garden where things grew in the luminescent dark, growing not toward sunlight but toward whatever this light was, which was something older and more patient than sun. Harry crouched at the edge and looked. He saw himself. Obvious enough, his face, his green eyes, his dark hair. But there was something else. A quality to the reflection that wasn't quite solid, as though the version of him in the water existed at two frequencies simultaneously, one perfectly ordinary 4-year-old boy and one something else, something that the water was more interested in than the boy. "What is that?" Harry asked. "That," Persephone said gently, sitting beside him, "is why the shadows listened." Hades explained it on a night when the asphodel glow was particularly soft and Harry had climbed, without asking, onto the chair beside Hades' enormous desk and was reading, or pretending to read, one of the smaller scrolls while Hades worked. They had been doing this for 2 weeks, the ritual of Harry's presence in the study, and Hades had not yet told him to go to bed, which Harry took as implied permission. "You have a question," Hades said, without looking up. "Several," Harry said. "Start with the worst one." Harry considered. "Am I going to have to go back?" Hades set down his quill. He looked at Harry for a long moment, and in the grey of his eyes something moved that Harry would only be able to name much later in his life as love deciding what to do with itself. "No," Hades said. "The people who sent me there won't find you here. A beat. Not until we're ready for them to." Harry filed this, the we, particularly. "And what am I now?" "Persephone showed me the pool. I look different in water. You look like what you are." Hades leaned back in his chair, which was not technically a throne but occupied the same conceptual space. "When we brought you here, Harry, we didn't just take you from a house. The underworld recognized you. The realm itself. The shadows that spoke to you in that cupboard were mine, yes, but they were also drawn by something in you. Something that has always been there." He paused. "I'll ask you to believe something difficult." "I'm for," Harry said. "I don't know what's difficult yet." This appeared to surprise Hades, which gave Harry a specific satisfaction. "Fair point," Hades said. "Then simply, you are mine. And Persephone's. Not because we made you from nothing, you existed before we found you, but because this realm chose you. And I choose to make that formal." His expression did the complicated thing again. "If you want it." Harry looked at the dark study, the scrolls, the window of luminescent deep-water light, the man across the desk who had said home like he meant it. "What does formal mean?" Harry asked. "It means you'd be our son," Hades said. "A god son. And in time, if you're willing, a god yourself." He added, as though this were a footnote, "Gods don't die." Harry was quiet for a moment. "And my parents? My first parents?" Hades was very still. "Their names were James and Lily Potter. They died protecting you, 3 years ago. Their souls, I can show you, someday, if you want to see them. They are at peace." Harry held this. It was heavy, but it was also, he pressed his fingers to the desk, to the solid stone, to the warmth of the realm around him, it was also here, something he could set down without losing. "Okay," Harry said. "Yes. Formal." Hades breathed out through his nose, slowly. "Good," he said, in his careful, controlled voice, and it was only the flowers that Persephone had arranged on his desk that did something then, 3 blossoms opening simultaneously in the dark, that gave away anything else. The year that followed was the kind of year that becomes foundational. Persephone taught him about growth. Not gardening, though there was that too, the underworld's strange garden where things grew in the dark toward older lights, but about the principle of it, the philosophical structure. "Death and spring are the same thing said in 2 different voices," she told him, on a morning that smelled of narcissus and deep water. "Nothing grows that hasn't first been underground. Nothing blooms that wasn't once a seed in the cold." Harry absorbed this with 4-year-old literalism, then 5-year-old growing comprehension, then 6-year-old instinct. By 7 he could walk into Persephone's garden and tell which plants were sleeping and which were gone, could feel the difference between dormancy and death in the soil under his hands with the certainty that other children feel heat. Hades taught him about death, which mostly meant teaching him about judgment. Harry sat at the back of the hall when the dead came for judgment, invisibly, at first, then simply quietly, and watched Hades work with the intense focus of someone studying a craft. And it was a craft, Harry realized. The weighing. The listening. The careful reading of a life's whole shape rather than its individual moments. "You never just see what they did," Harry said, one afternoon, aged 6, swinging his feet from a stone bench at the side of the hall. "No," Hades said. "You see why. Always." Hades looked at him briefly. "What we do when we're desperate or afraid is not the full measure of who we are. The full measure is, everything," Harry said. Hades was quiet for a moment. "Yes." At 7, Harry met Thanatos, who was Death's other face, beautiful and terrible and deeply irritated by Harry immediately. "Why does it have your eyes?" Thanatos asked Hades, looking at Harry as though he were a particularly confusing administrative problem. Those are my eyes, Harry said. They're green. Exactly. Thanatos blinked. Then, slowly, a look moved across his face that was not quite amusement but was its neighbor. Fine, he said. I'll train him. Don't blame me if he ends up able to kill with a look. That's already a concern, Hades said mildly, from behind his scrolls. Thanatos trained him in the fundamental language of death, not killing, nothing so crude, but the awareness. The ability to feel a mortal life like a candle flame, sense its temperature, its remaining burn. Harry practiced on the meadows at first, walking among the souls and learning to read the residue of their lives the way a reader feels paper. By 8 he could tell how long a living thing had left without touching it. By 9 he found this too easy and stopped trying, the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. Hecate came on his 8th birthday, which Persephone threw with the kind of determined enthusiasm that suggested birthdays had been religiously celebrated to compensate for missing the first 4. She arrived in a crackling haze of torchlight and looked at Harry across the table loaded with Underworld-adapted cake, which was extraordinary, Underworld bakers having had considerable time to perfect their craft, and said, "You're the mortal-born boy who smells like the river," and Harry said, "You're the goddess who smells like lightning," and they stared at each other and then she said, "Good. We'll start on Tuesday." Magic, it turned out, was something Harry had been doing accidentally all his life. Stopping Piers Pocus's stone. Making things grow in the cold. Seeing in perfect darkness. Hecate simply taught him that accidents could be decisions. Magic is intent, she said, on the first Tuesday. What you want, focused until the world accommodates it. That sounds like willpower, Harry said. Magic is willpower, Hecate said. Applied to reality. Some people have a lot. Some people have a little. You, she looked at him with her three-way gaze, the torch and moonlight and dark all shifting in her eyes, you have a complicated amount. How complicated? The world might have opinions about it, she said simply, and moved on to the lesson. Hermes visited whenever he wanted to, which was often and always at inconvenient moments. He brought Harry gifts, a pair of sandals that Harry refused to wear because he had his father's specific relationship with footwear and practicality, and a small bronze mirror that showed you what you'd look like in 20 years, and once a live snake wrapped around a small caduceus staff which turned out to be a profound misread of what Harry actually wanted, though Harry and the snake got on fine once they established that neither of them had requested this arrangement. The snake, Tysus, Harry named him, which meant creation in Old Greek and made Hermes choke on his nectar, stayed. He wound around Harry's wrist like a living bracelet, cold-blooded and sardonic, and they spoke in what Harry thought was simply snake until Hecate heard them one day and went very still in the way she went still when something significant was happening. "Do you know what you're doing when you speak to that snake?" Hecate asked. "Talking," Harry said. "In Parseltongue," Hecate said. "The language of serpents. Old magic. Very old." She looked at him with the torch-fire expression. "The man who marked you could do this. The one who killed my first parents," Harry said. He'd been told the whole story by now, Voldemort, the prophecy, the curse, all of it, told plainly, with the matter-of-factness that Hades applied to most things, which Harry appreciated more than dramatics would have been. "Yes." Harry looked at Tysus, who was watching this conversation with the superior expression snakes were most of the time. "He and I got it from the same place," Harry said. "The Slytherin line." "Hecate, that means it's mine. Not his." Hecate looked at him. Then she smiled, which she did rarely enough that it mattered. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." At 9, the divine transformation happened. Harry had known it was coming. Hades and Persephone had explained it over a long quiet evening, both sitting with him in Persephone's garden while Tysus slept coiled on a warm stone nearby, the luminescent flowers open around them like attentive faces. Godhood was not something that happened to you, Hades had explained. Not a procedure. Not a moment. It was more like, recognition. The realm agreeing with what you already were. It might feel like falling, Persephone said. Or like coming up for air, depending on your nature. What did it feel like for you? Harry asked. She was quiet for a moment. Like stepping out of a winter that had lasted too long, she said at last, and her eyes were somewhere else briefly, somewhere with pomegranate and dark halls and a choice she'd made that changed the shape of the world. Like something finally being mine. And for you? Harry asked Hades. I was born to it, Hades said simply. I don't have a before. Harry turned this over. What will I be? The god of what? Hades and Persephone exchanged a look, the quick, complex, married look that contained a paragraph in a second, and Persephone said, We think you'll be the god of thresholds. What does that mean? Death and spring are both thresholds, Hades said. The crossing between states. The moment of before and after. Life and death, winter and spring, the sleeping and the waking. He looked at Harry with grey deep eyes. You are between both of us, Harry. You're the door. The door that swings both ways, Persephone said softly. Harry sat with this for a while. The garden hummed around him, quiet and luminescent. Tisus shifted on his stone. Okay, Harry said, the way he always said okay to the important things. When? Whenever you want, Hades said. It's your choice. It was always your choice. This mattered to Harry in a way he could feel in his sternum, the same way he'd felt the dark in the cupboard, something real, something meant for him, something his. Now, Harry said. Later, years later, when he was grown and teaching someone else about the nature of power, he described what happened as exactly what Persephone had predicted, coming up for air after holding his breath since birth. The whole realm rang, once, like a bell struck perfectly. The souls in the meadows looked toward the palace. Even the rivers, all 5 of them, not just his favorite Acheron, went still for one long moment. When it passed, Harry was sitting in the garden exactly as before, 9 years old and cross-legged in the dark, Tisus awake now and watching him with an expression of someone who has just met someone more completely. What was different was everything internal. He could feel it now, the whole realm, breathing around him. The lives of mortal things above, candle flames of variable warmth scattered across a world he could only sense as a vast geography of being. The boundary of every threshold, every doorway, every moment of crossing between states. Death and spring and everything between them, humming in his blood like the Acheron's dark current. Hades was watching him. Persephone had her hand over her mouth. Are you all right? Hades asked. I'm everything, Harry said, which sounded strange but was actually perfectly accurate. Then he thought about it and added, is there still cake, because some things remained important regardless of cosmic significance. Persephone laughed, a real laugh, with her whole chest in it, the kind that made the flowers bloom faster, and pulled him against her with an arm around his shoulders, and Hades put one large hand briefly on Harry's head, the lightest possible touch, the touch of a man for whom large demonstrations of feeling were foreign and who was discovering that the feeling was large enough to require them anyway. After that, Harry grew differently. Not faster or slower in body, gods aged at their own pace, when they aged at all, and Harry was 9 years old in appearance for several more years before something in him decided to settle into something older. But inside, in the ways that mattered, he grew with the compound acceleration of someone learning what they were capable of and finding the ceiling much higher than expected. Thanatos pushed him harder. The awareness that had once been a gentle sensitivity became precision. Harry could walk through the underworld and feel the weight of every soul like a musician hearing the individual notes of a chord. He could touch a threshold, the boundary of a door, the edge of a river, the moment of a season's turning, and feel the whole conversation between what was on either side. He learned to move through shadow the way his father moved, which Thanatos described as the most annoying development since Persephone decided the underworld needed a garden and which Hades described as reasonable, he's my son. He learned that spring did not only mean flowers but meant the fundamental insistence that things continue, the deep biological argument against winter's finality. He could feel this too, in Persephone's garden and beyond it, in the careful negotiation between life and death that played out in every living thing every moment. He made 3 trips to the world above before Hogwarts, always with Hermes as a reluctant chaperone, to see what mortals looked like in their natural habitat. The first trip, Athens, which Hermes called a reasonable introduction, showed Harry the mortals in their element, arguing, building, spilling coffee, falling in love against streetlights. He watched it all with the intense curiosity of a naturalist encountering a new species. They were beautiful in their brevity, he thought, burning so brightly precisely because they burned so briefly. The second trip was London, because the wizarding world sat in London like a secret inside a secret, and Harry wanted to see it. Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade, the magical communities scattered through the city. He walked through it all, with Hermes protesting about prophylactic measures, and felt the magic like a different language than Hecate's, younger and more structured, channeled through wands and tradition and careful institutional management. Interesting. Limited in some ways. Passionate in others. He met a ghost in Godric's Hollow. She didn't know who he was 11 by then in appearance, dark-haired and green-eyed and quietly radiating something she couldn't identify, but she followed him through the village square for 10 minutes before finally saying, "You smell like someone I knew, once." "My mother?" Harry said. The ghost stilled. "Lily Potter." "Yes," Harry said. "I'm her son." He didn't stay long. Some thresholds are best crossed briefly. The third trip was also London, the September 1st of his 11th year, and he stood outside the wall between platforms 9 and 10 and felt the magic of Hogwarts like a warmth from many miles away, old, layered, complicated by centuries of the living and the passing through, and thought about what lay on the other side of it. "You don't have to go," Hermes said, behind him, in a tone that suggested he'd prefer Harry not go and was managing his feelings about it poorly. "I know," Harry said. "There are people there who think they know what you are. Dumbledore, I know. And the followers of the man who killed your Hermes." Harry looked at him. Hermes, beautiful and quick-eyed and perpetually in motion, went briefly still. "I know. I'm going anyway." He looked back at the wall. "They're interesting. Mortals." He said it not with condescension but with genuine, deep affection, the word carrying the weight of every candle flame life he'd ever felt above him, burning so earnestly in the dark. "I want to know them." Hermes looked at him for a moment. Then he pinched the bridge of his perfect nose and said, "Fine. But I'm telling your father you did something dangerous and it was entirely your own idea." "It was entirely my own idea," Harry agreed. "I know. That's what makes it so exhausting," Hermes said fondly, and disappeared. Harry turned back to the wall. On the other side, a train was getting ready to leave. In a week he would stand in front of it and step aboard, and the wizarding world would meet, for the first time, the boy they thought they'd made an orphan. It had made him something else instead. He pushed through the wall, and smiled at the scarlet engine, and thought, "Let's see what you are." Chapter 2, Letters from a World That Forgot Him. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Harry was in Persephone's garden when it happened, not the Underworld garden, but the one she kept in the mortal world, the house in the hills above Eleusis where she spent portions of autumn in the old tradition, where the soil was dark and good and the olive trees had been growing since before most mortal nations had thought to name themselves. Harry liked this house. It had 2 floors, a kitchen that smelled permanently of herbs, and a window seat overlooking the valley where he could sit for hours watching the distant threads of mortal life go about their business. He was sitting in that window seat when Tysus lifted his head from Harry's forearm and looked at the door. 3 seconds later, the owl hit the window glass with a hollow thud, bounced back, righted itself in midair with profound dignity, and knocked instead. Harry opened the window. The owl, a tawny bird with the self-important bearing of an official messenger, extended its leg. The letter attached to it was sealed with a wax crest, a stylized H, for quadrants, a motto Harry already knew from his reading. Draco dormiens nunquam titilandus. Never tickle a sleeping dragon. He'd always liked that one for its practicality. He took the letter. The owl looked at him, then at Tysus, then made the rapid calculated decision to leave quickly, which Harry respected. Mr. H. Potter, the envelope said on the front, in green ink. The address below was not number 4, Privet Drive. It simply said the garden, Eleusis, Greece, which meant the school's address-finding magic was either very good or had required significant effort. Harry thought about what it would mean for the school's address-finding systems to look for him and find this, an olive grove on a hill above a city where his divine mother wintered, and felt a specific pleasure in the image of the Hogwarts quill encountering that particular threshold. He turned the envelope over. Opened it with his thumbnail. Read the letter inside with the attention he gave everything, fully, without hurry, with the part of his mind that Hades had trained to read the shape of a thing rather than just its surface. The letter was formal and welcoming, which was interesting. Welcoming suggested they expected him to need welcoming, which meant they didn't know what he was. The list of required books and equipment was oddly charming in its specificity: 1 pair dragonhide gloves, 1 cauldron, pewter, standard size 2, 1 set plain work robes. Mortals and their material specificity. He read the list twice with the interested attention of someone encountering a new culture's etiquette guide. Who writes to you? Persephone asked, appearing in the doorway with her hands dark from the garden and 3 white flowers braided casually into her hair. Hogwarts. Harry handed her the letter. She read it. Her expression was the careful, composed one she wore when she was deciding something. Her hand moved slightly, turning the parchment, reading both sides. Then she set it on the window seat beside Harry and looked out at the valley. We should tell your father. Already did, Harry said, and nodded at Tysus, who had Hades's shadow clinging to him for the last 30 seconds in a way that indicated the message had been routed through the Underworld's communication system, which operated through shade and echo and was considerably faster than Owl Post. He's coming up. Of course he is, Persephone said, which told Harry everything about the relationship between Hades and communication technology that involved waiting. Hades arrived the way he usually arrived in the mortal world, a controlled shadow transit, stepping out of the darkest corner of the room as though he'd been in it all along and had simply chosen now to be visible about it. He had the Hogwarts letter in his hand. He'd received his copy of the message through Tysus and had, apparently, obtained the letter through means of shadow communication that Harry had learned not to question. Albus Dumbledore will want to see you, Hades said, by way of greeting. Probably, Harry said. He's spent 10 years building a story about you, Persephone said, moving to stand beside Hades with the easy proximity of 2 people who have shared space for millennia. The boy who lived. The orphan. The child who needs guidance and protection and careful management. He's going to be disappointed, Harry said. That, Hades said, setting the letter on the window seat with the precise movements of a man organizing his thoughts physically, is a mild summary, yes. He looked at Harry. You understand what going to this school means. He'll try to understand what you are. He'll try to position you. Let him try, Harry said simply. Something crossed Hades' face, pride, if it had been wearing practical clothes and carrying a ledger. He didn't say anything. I want to go to Diagon Alley, Harry said. Properly. For the supplies. He picked up the list again. A pewter cauldron. I've never owned a cauldron. You were raised in the Underworld, Persephone said. You've worked with materials that would reduce a pewter cauldron to its component atoms. I know. But it's mine. Mortal and mine. He folded the list. Will you come with me? Both of them looked at him. Then at each other. Then Persephone smiled, slow, warm, with the specific pleasure of someone who has been waiting to be asked. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. I'll need something to wear, Hades said. You look fine, Harry said. I look like the god of death on a Thursday in Eleusis. You are the god of death on a Thursday in Eleusis. Diagon Alley requires slightly more, you look fine, Persephone said, definitively, and that was the end of that. They took the tube. This had been Harry's idea, and it remained one of his better ones. The London Underground in August was crowded and warm and smelled of the particular cocktail of humanity that Harry found endlessly interesting. The density of all those brief burning lives in close proximity, each one a separate warmth, a separate story, the whole collective hum of it like a very complex chord. He sat between his parents on the central line and watched the other passengers with the open attention of a naturalist. Hades watched the underground map with the focus of a man encountering a new organizational system and finding it professionally compelling. "They've mapped it," he said. "All the lines." "It's a tube map," Harry said. "The rivers of the underworld," Hades said, finger tracing the colored lines, "are not this well organized." He sounded genuinely impressed, which was rare enough that both Harry and Persephone looked at him. "This one," he pointed to the central line in red, "they've color-coded them. For navigation." "They have phones too," Harry said. "With maps on them." "I know about phones. Do you have one?" "Hermes has 17 of them. I've borrowed his when necessary." "What do you use them for?" Hades considered. "He calls me when there's administrative difficulty in the mortal world and the shade communication is insufficient. And once," he added, with the tone of someone recounting a minor bureaucratic incident, "I ordered a pizza." Persephone made the sound she made when she was not laughing, but everything about her was laughing. "Did you like it?" Harry asked. "It was adequate," Hades said, which from him meant excellent. The tube deposited them at Leicester Square and they walked, the three of them, through the shifting August crowd. Hades moved through crowds the way water moves through stone, not aggressively, not with effort, but with the specific inevitability of something that exists at a slightly different level of reality. People moved out of his way without knowing they were doing it. Persephone walked beside him with the easy confidence of someone who has been the most extraordinary person in every room she's entered for 3,000 years and has stopped noticing. Harry walked at Hades' other side and took everything in, because he never stopped taking things in. The Leaky Cauldron was a dark pub in a row of shops, invisible to non-magical eyes and therefore to most of the passing crowd. Harry could see it clearly, had always been able to see the invisible, or perhaps more precisely had never learned to not see things. He pushed the door open and stepped in. The interior was dim and smelled of old wood and something slightly chemical, potions, or the residue of magic used casually and often. Several people looked up as they entered. Then several more people looked up. The barman, Tom, whom Harry had read about in the same spirit he'd read about Hogwarts, preparatory research, appeared from behind the bar and looked at the three of them with the widening eyes of a man recalibrating something fundamental. "Welcome," he said, to the general group of them, with the tone of someone not sure which of the three people in front of him was the one most requiring welcome. "Thank you," Harry said pleasantly. "We need through to the alley." Of course." Tom's eyes moved to Hades, then away with the speed of the survival instinct. Moved to Persephone, stayed a moment longer, moved on. Came back to Harry and stayed there with the particular attention of someone who has recognized a name and is trying to reconcile it with a face. "Are you, through to the alley, please," Harry said, the same pleasantness, no more or less. Tom showed them through. The brick wall opened with the same tap-and-fold Hermes had demonstrated on Harry's second trip, and then Diagon Alley was in front of them, the crooked shops, the colorful crowds, the smell of everything all at once, potions, ingredients and paper and something that smelled like burning sugar from a cart selling magical confectionery. Harry stepped through and immediately a thing happened that was not dramatic but was entirely noticeable. The crowd moved around them. Not the way it had on the underground, where it was just Hades' general gravitational effect. This was more diffuse, people turning without knowing they'd turned, conversations pausing half a second, children going quiet. The specific low-level recognition of something old walking among something young. Magic, in its collective instinct, noticing. "They can feel us," Harry said, interested. "They've always been able to feel your father," Persephone said, examining a display of magical plants outside a shop with the focused attention she gave all flora. "Even the ones who don't know they can." Harry watched a small girl tug at her mother's sleeve and point at Hades with the complete honesty of a 3-year-old. The mother looked, then looked away quickly, pulling the child along. Hades noticed the girl but not the mother's discomfort, his attention elsewhere, on the alley itself, which he was scanning with the gray-eyed assessment of someone reading something written in a language he knows. "It's old," Hades said. "The magic here. Older than most of the people using it realize." "Hecate mentioned that," Harry said. "She said British wizarding tradition goes back further than its current institutional memory." "Much further." Hades' eyes stopped on something. "And some of what it's forgotten is not forgotten by everyone." Harry followed his gaze. Across the alley, a pale-haired man in robes that were expensive in the aggressive way that wanted you to know it was walking with a small pale-haired boy and the general air of someone to whom Diagon Alley owed something. He hadn't seen Harry yet. "Malfoy," Harry said. "You know him?" "I read the family history. Old wizarding family, significant dark arts association, followed Voldemort, they claim under compulsion, no one particularly believes them." He watched the man. "That would be Lucius. The boy is probably Draco." Draco Malfoy was, at this distance, an 11-year-old with excellent posture and the expression of someone who had been told since infancy that they were important and had believed it entirely. He was looking at the window of quality Quidditch supplies with a proprietorial interest. "Not our concern today," Persephone said, with the serene practicality of someone excellent at staying on task. "Not yet," Harry said. They started with Gringotts, which was also partly to let Hades see the bank, which Harry had correctly predicted would produce an interesting interaction. The goblins were small and ancient-looking and radiated the professional wariness of beings who had dealt with humans for a very long time and had opinions about it. The one at the main desk looked up as the three of them approached and did the specific sequence of goblin stillness that Harry had learned to read as the goblin equivalent of dropping everything. "Account?" the goblin said, to Harry, ignoring the other two with the professionalism of someone who had decided to pretend the other two weren't what they obviously were. "Potter," Harry said. "Harry Potter." The goblin's eyes flicked to his forehead. "The scar." Harry watched the recognition land and settle. The goblin said nothing more, called a colleague with a short word, and led them below without ceremony. Harry liked goblins for exactly this, they were professional in a way that transcended awe. The world might be ending but the ledger still required balancing. In the cart, hurtling through the tunnels at speed, Hades gripped the front rail with both hands and looked around with the expression he never quite managed to lose when encountering impressive engineering. Harry watched him. "They built this themselves," Harry said. "I know," Hades said. "You look like you're appreciating it." "I am. Father." Hades looked at him. "You look like you're considering acquiring it." "I have no interest in acquiring a goblin bank," Hades said, with the precise dignity of someone considering it slightly. The goblin driving the cart stared pointedly ahead and said nothing. The vault was full, which Harry had expected. The Potters had been a wealthy family. Hades stood at the vault entrance and looked at the gold with the expression of someone for whom wealth was an abstraction. Money meant very little in a realm where the concept of scarcity didn't quite apply, but there was something in his face watching Harry take what he needed, quiet and focused, that had nothing to do with gold. Harry took what was necessary. Not extravagantly, not minimally. He'd learned from Hades that the right amount of anything was the amount that served the purpose. Flourish and blots was Harry's favorite, which surprised no one who knew him. He moved through the shelves with the easy fluency of someone who had grown up in a library that contained, among other things, the complete annotated history of every mortal civilization since the Bronze Age. But these were different books, magical theory written by witches who didn't know what Hecate had taught him, history composed by people who understood only the visible surface of events, potions text structured around the assumption that magic was a narrow and disciplined system. He bought everything on the list. Then he bought 12 more books that weren't on the list, because they were interesting. Persephone appeared at his elbow with a book about herbology, not the curriculum text but a more advanced volume, and said, "This one is wrong about mandrakes," with the calm certainty of someone for whom mandrakes were a personal acquaintance rather than an academic subject. "How wrong?" Harry asked. "Fundamentally. They've mistaken the scream's function." She opened the book to the relevant page and pointed. "It says the scream is a defense mechanism." "It's not." "What is it?" "Communication." She looked thoughtful. "They're talking to each other. The scream is the only frequency at which their root systems resonate. You sever the conversation when you uproot them." She considered. "They're not wrong that it's fatal to humans. But the reason is grief, not defense." Harry looked at her. "You should write a herbology textbook." "I have. Several. In other languages, other traditions." She closed the book. "Buy it anyway. It has some interesting notes on Nightshade." They collected everything: cauldron from the cauldron shop, which smelled of old metal and something chemical, the shopkeeper watching Hades with barely concealed "what is that large person doing in my shop" energy, robes from Madame Malkin's, an owl, which Persephone vetoed on the grounds that Tysus was better than any owl and Harry couldn't argue with this, a wand, which was last. Ollivander's was narrow and crammed and smelled of cedar and wood shavings, and the man behind the counter had eyes that reflected light like still water. He looked at Harry for a long, considering moment before Harry had finished walking through the door. "I've been wondering," Ollivander said, "when you'd come in." "Have you?" Harry said. 10 years ago I made the wand that gave you that scar." Ollivander's pale eyes moved to Harry's forehead. "And I've been, yes. Wondering." He looked more carefully. His expression shifted. The subtle recalibration of a man who knows things about the properties of materials and power and is now encountering something that doesn't fit his current model. "You're different than I expected," he said. "Most things are," Harry said pleasantly. "The one chooses the wizard," Ollivander said, moving toward his shelves with the practiced motion of someone dancing a familiar dance, though his eyes kept returning to Harry. "Always true. But I find myself thinking that in your case," he pulled a box, "the ordinary formula may require adjustment." "Try several," Harry said, sitting on the small chair. "I'm curious." What followed was, by Ollivander's own eventual expression, an unprecedented 35 minutes. Wand after wand, holly, willow, vine, yew, mahogany, blackthorn, each produced not the usual gentle shower of sparks or the bang and scatter of a poor match, but something else. Each wand responded, which was not the problem. The problem was the quality of the response. The first wand, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, produced a warmth that ran up the length of Harry's arm and made every candle in the shop brighten simultaneously, then kept brightening until the wax began to run. Ollivander took it back, quickly. The yew wand, 13 inches, dragon heartstring, produced a wind that moved from nowhere and scattered a stack of boxes across the floor. The blackthorn, 11 inches, thestral tail hair, simply purred, which wands did not typically do. "The thestral," Harry said, turning the blackthorn in his fingers. "You can see them," Ollivander said, not quite a question. "Thestrals. You've seen death." "I live with it," Harry said. Ollivander looked at him for a moment with the still-water eyes. "That is not what I expected you to mean by that." "I know." Harry turned the wand again. "But it's not the right one." Ollivander went back to the shelves. He went further back, to a section that Harry noticed had less dust only because it had been visited recently, boxes carried out and returned. Searching. He came back with something unusual, a box darker than the others, cedar wood, old. "This one," Ollivander said, hesitantly, as though not quite sure what he was offering, "I made it 40 years ago and it has never found a match. Elder wood. 15 inches. Dual core, phoenix feather and asphodel root." He held it out. Harry took it. The sensation was not sparks or wind or warmth. It was recognition, the same deep chest frequency he'd felt in the shadows of the cupboard, the same ring the realm had made when he'd accepted godhood in Persephone's garden. The wand and Harry agreed about what they were, completely and immediately. The candles in the shop went out. Every one of them. In the dark, the wand emitted a faint silver-green light of its own, steady and unhurried. The candles came back up slowly. Ollivander was very still. His eyes moved between the wand and Harry's face. Asphodel, Harry said. The flower of the dead, Ollivander said, in a different voice than before. The professional tone had shifted into something older, the tone of a man encountering not a category he knows but a truth he hadn't written into his categories. It grows in the meadows of the underworld, according to Greek mythology. According to fact, Harry said, too. Ollivander looked at him. At Hades and Persephone, visible through the shop window, Hades examining the exterior of the alley with his hands behind his back, Persephone having found an interesting plant growing from a crack in the opposite wall and crouching to look at it. Ollivander made the face of a man adding something up and finding the sum unexpected. 7 galleons, Ollivander said, which was technically all he said, though his expression contained several additional paragraphs. They were on their way back down the alley when Harry felt it. Not a threat, nothing so crude. More like a frequency shift, the way the air changes before weather. He stopped walking, which caused Persephone on his left to stop and look at him, and caused Hades, who had the peripheral attention of someone permanently aware of the entire perimeter, to stop and turn slightly. What is it? Persephone said. Harry scanned the crowd. Busy, colorful, the usual Diagon Alley August energy, families with new students, excited first years, older students doing the familiar business of restocking. He looked past the surface of it, past the visible, and felt for the frequencies underneath. There, near Gringotts. A shimmer of something. Not a soul exactly. Not a living person's warmth. Something between those states, clinging to the edge of a body that was too thin and too pale and moving with the specific avoidance of someone who had spent so long concealing fear that the concealment had become structural. A young man in robes. A turban. And beneath the turban, pressed against the back of his skull like a second face pressed against a wall, Harry stopped that analysis. He looked at it only long enough to know what it was. A fragment. A soul shard. The specific flavor of someone who had divided themselves past the point of humanity and was now existing in the in-between, grasping at a host with the desperate, furious grip of something that refused the threshold and had been refusing it for years. He knew who it was. He'd known he'd encounter the remnants sooner or later. Him, Harry said, quietly. Hades had already looked. His expression had not changed, which with Hades meant it had changed entirely in all the invisible ways. Yes, Hades said. He's on the professor. The one with the turban. Yes. He's been refusing it for years. Harry's voice was neutral, the same tone he used when reading the Asphodel Souls, clinical in the way that was actually the far side of something much deeper. He split himself. Multiple times. Which means he won't be able to cross while pieces of him are still, Harry, Persephone said, one hand on his shoulder. Not restraining. Grounding. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I know what he did. I know what he did to make himself this. The soul shard thing near Gringotts moved away down the street, attached to the pale professor, neither of them aware they were being observed. He's so afraid, Harry said, and the word held not pity but something more precise, the studied understanding of someone who has sat at the boundary of death for years and knows the shape of every kind of terror. He's been afraid of me since I was a year old. Because of a prophecy. You're not afraid of him, Hades said. No, Harry agreed. He split his soul and tortured people and built an entire empire on the idea that he was beyond death. He watched the crowd close over the spot where the professor had been. He doesn't understand death at all. He understands it perfectly, Hades said. That's why he's afraid of it. Harry considered this. Then, we'll deal with it this year. We. Persephone said, one eyebrow raised. Not we you, Harry said. Me. But knowing you're there. He looked at Hades. Can I handle it? Hades looked at him for a long moment, with the gray eyes and the cliff-faced jaw and the careful, private expression of a father doing the specific mathematics of letting go. Yes, he said. You can handle it. And if I need you? Then, Hades said simply, we're there. Good, Harry said, and they walked on through the alley. They ate lunch at a small place Persephone found, an ordinary cafe, not magical, wooden tables and very good bread and coffee that Hades drank with the focused appreciation he gave to anything well-made. Harry had a sandwich and read one of his new books and listened to his parents' quiet conversation, the easy, layered, intimate shorthand of two people who have shared several thousand years, with the specific contentment of someone who has never taken ordinary warmth for granted and therefore find it extraordinary. What do you think it'll be like? Persephone asked him, over the rim of her cup. Hogwarts. Harry thought about it seriously, turning pages without reading. Old, he said. Complicated. Full of people who want to be more important than they are. He paused. And some people who don't know they're important at all yet. Neville Longbottom, he thought, another name from the reading, another child at the edge of the prophecy, who had missed the specific cruelty of Voldemort's attention but had not escaped the era's general cruelty at all. I want to know them. The real ones. You'll stand out, Persephone said. Not a warning. A fact offered affectionately. I already stand out, Harry said. I have a lightning bolt scar and I live in the underworld and my father is death. Standing out is relative. Hades made a sound that was almost a laugh, and ate his bread. Don't disappear on them, Persephone said. When it gets strange or difficult, don't become untouchable. Let them know you. I know. I mean it. You can love mortals from a distance and learn nothing. Being among them, Mum, Harry said. She stopped. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with those green eyes that matched his exactly. Then she smiled, the deep one, the one with the winter to spring history in it. Yes, she said. Right. Sorry. Don't apologize, Harry said. You're allowed to worry. I'm a goddess, she said. I don't worry. You're a mother, Harry said. You worry constantly. Hades looked at his coffee with the careful focus of someone allowing a moment its space. Come home at winter, Persephone said. The underworld will miss you. 6 months ago you complained that the underworld needed more windows. And I stand by that. It can miss you and need windows. Harry laughed, which he did easily. Years in the underworld had given him a relationship with laughter that people who fear death tend not to develop, the specific freedom of someone who knows the shape of endings and finds the middles therefore more vivid and precious. He put his book in his bag. Outside, the August sun was doing its ordinary work on London. The city moved, and breathed, and burned with its million brief lives. I'll write, he said. By shadow, not owl. Owl post from Hogwarts is monitored by the headmaster, Hades said, which was less a parental concern and more a professional assessment. I know. Shadow messages. Or Tysus. He glanced at the snake, currently coiled in Harry's bag with the serenity of a creature who had fully resolved any concerns about the quality of his current accommodation. Dumbledore won't intercept those. He'll try, Hades said. He'll be disappointed, Harry said. He does that a lot, apparently. 2 days before September 1st, the Weasleys arrived. Not to the underworld or to Eleusis, Harry encountered them in London, at the same cafe, which was coincidence in the way that things involving 7 red-headed people and a mother with the organizational energy of a small military campaign are ever truly coincidental. The Weasley family occupied 3 tables pushed together and still overflowed, the younger children on each other's chairs, the oldest, twins, Harry identified, identical in face and entirely individual in expression, managing to simultaneously eat, talk, and conduct what appeared to be a small experiment involving a sugar packet and a wand concealed under the table. The youngest boy, about Harry's age, with the specific social confidence of someone accustomed to being part of a crowd and therefore not afraid of strangers, caught Harry looking from the next table and looked back. He had freckles and blue eyes and the kind of face that had not yet decided what sort of person it was going to be, which Harry found interesting in the best way. "You've got a snake," the boy said. "Yes," Harry said. Tysus had emerged from the bag to investigate the smell of food and was now visible on the table, looking at the Weasley table with the expression of evaluating a complex social situation. Is it a pet?" "More of a companion," Harry said. The boy considered this. "What's its name?" "Tysus," Harry said. "That's not a usual name," the boy said, which was both true and delivered without any particular judgment. "No," Harry agreed. "He wasn't a usual gift." "Who gave it to you?" "Hermes," Harry said, and watched the boy process this and arrive at the conclusion that Harry was probably joking, which was the reasonable conclusion. "I'm Ron," the boy said. "Ron Weasley." "Harry," Harry said. "Potter." The sequence of expressions across Ron Weasley's face over the next 3 seconds was educational, recognition, surprise, attempted neutrality, and the complete collapse of attempted neutrality into undisguised fascination. He stared at Harry's forehead. Then, with an effort of social calibration visible to the naked eye, looked back at Harry's face. "You're Harry Potter," Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. The one who," "Yes," Harry said. Ron's jaw closed. He sat with it for a moment. Then something else crossed his face, a simpler thing, the direct warmth of someone who has decided the most interesting person in a social situation is also the one they most want to talk to, and he said, "Are you going to Hogwarts, then?" "Yes," Harry said. "September 1st. "Me too," Ron said, with visible relief. Do you know much about it?" "I've got brothers who went, well, 5 brothers, but they all say different things. Fred says the staircases move on purpose to annoy people and George says that's not true, they're just badly enchanted, but I think Fred's right because the enchantments have been there for 1,000 years and someone would have fixed it if it was accidental, you know." Harry considered this. "Fred is probably right," he said, and Ron looked victorious. One of the twins, Fred, presumably, appeared at Harry's elbow with the sudden materialization of someone who had been adjacent to multiple conversations simultaneously. He looked at Harry. At Tysus. Back at Harry. "Your snake is trying to charm my mother," Fred said, nodding toward the Weasley table where, indeed, Tysus had managed to slither 3 feet toward the Weasley matriarch and was looking up at her with what Harry recognized as his most disarming expression. "He does that," Harry said. "Is it working?" Ron asked. They all looked. Molly Weasley had gone slightly pale but also slightly charmed, her hand extended tentatively toward Tysus, who was doing the snake equivalent of being delightful. "Worryingly, yes," Harry said. Fred grinned, a quick, bright thing, electric with the specific energy of someone who finds the world reliably funny and entirely worthy of prodding. "I'm Fred," he said. "You must be someone interesting, because our mum doesn't look at people she's just met like that." "Like what?" Harry asked. "Like she's about to adopt them," Fred said, with the breezy certainty of someone who has been on the receiving end of this look many times. Harry looked at Molly Weasley, who had now fully extended her hand and was allowing Tysus to investigate her fingers with his tongue, her expression having completed the journey from wary to genuinely fond. Something in Harry's chest did a slow, warm movement, the recognition of a certain kind of person, the open-hearted and ferociously loving kind, the kind his parents had explained to him were the ones worth knowing. "I'm Harry," he said. "Harry," Fred stopped. "Oh," he said. "Oh," Ron called it. "Called what?" Ron asked. "You said on the train to Surrey last year, you said I bet Harry Potter's actually brilliant and everyone's wasted his entire childhood treating him like a problem and I said 5 nuts says you're right." Ron went pink. I didn't say that. You absolutely said that, Fred said cheerfully. Harry looked at Ron. Ron looked at Harry. Ron's face was doing a complicated negotiation between embarrassment and the decision that if he was going to be embarrassed he might as well be honest. I might have said something like that, Ron said. The prophet made it sound like you'd had a rough go. And I thought, anyway. He shrugged. Are you alright? This was delivered with the complete sincerity of someone who meant the question exactly as asked, not as social courtesy, not as rhetorical bridge, but as a genuine inquiry into Harry's state of being, delivered with no particular expectation of a complicated answer. Harry had met a great many beings in his 11 years, including several gods, hundreds of thousands of souls, at least 3 fates who had varying opinions about his existence, and Sharon, who was blunt in the way only a ferryman who has heard every possible final regret ever expressed by humanity could be. He was not generally surprised by people. He found Ron Weasley unexpectedly touching. Yes, Harry said. I'm all right. Better than all right, really. Good, Ron said, as though this settled something he'd been keeping track of, and grabbed his sandwich back from the plate he'd abandoned to come and look at Tysus. Do you want to sit over? Mum will make room. She always makes room. Harry looked at the crowded Weasley tables, the warm chaos of a large family eating lunch in August, all of them talking over each other, Fred now explaining the Tysus situation to the rest of the table with expansive hand gestures, the youngest Weasley girl watching Tysus from a cautious distance with the specific calculation of someone deciding between fear and fascination. He picked up his book and his bag and moved to the Weasley table, and was absorbed into it immediately, the way anyone who has ever sat with the Weasleys has always been immediately absorbed, because Molly Weasley pushed a plate toward him and said, "Eat, you look like you need feeding, are those your parents over there? Bring them over," and Harry looked back at the table where Hades was watching him with the careful expression he wore when noting something important, and Persephone was already standing, because Persephone always knew what the right next move was. Hades and Molly Weasley met over a lunch table in London, which was an event Harry would later describe to Thanatos as one of the more cosmically improbable things he'd witnessed in 11 years, and Thanatos would say, "Did she offer him food?" and Harry would say, "For times," and Thanatos would look at the ceiling and say, "Somehow that's the most sensible thing about this story." Molly pushed food at Hades. Hades accepted with the quiet grace of someone who understood that refusing Molly Weasley's food was both socially incorrect and practically difficult. Persephone sat between Molly and Arthur Weasley and within 10 minutes was discussing the Weasley garden with Arthur with the engaged enthusiasm of someone whose professional domain was being unexpectedly presented with a fascinating project. Arthur Weasley, who collected Muggle artifacts with the innocent passion of an enthusiast who has never met the subject of his passion directly, discovered Hades had used the Underground and the tube map and nearly knocked his coffee over. "They've color-coded them?" Arthur said, leaning forward. "Yes," Hades said, reaching into his coat and producing, to Harry's genuine surprise, the tube map he'd been looking at on the central line and had apparently retained. "Red for the Central, blue for the Piccadilly, extraordinary," Arthur breathed, taking it with the reverence of a collector accepting something rare. "And what's this, interchanges? They've marked where the lines cross." "Yes," Hades said, and there was a quality in his voice that Harry recognized from the study, from the Judgment Hall, from the long evenings over scrolls, the tone Hades used when he had found something worth respecting. Someone thought carefully about the flow of people. About movement and direction and the points of connection. Arthur stopped. Reconsidered. "Like an underground river system," he said, then went slightly red, presumably because he'd remembered who he was talking to. "Exactly like that," Hades said, with a completely level expression, and Harry bit down on a smile. Ron appeared at Harry's elbow with 2 pieces of cake, one extended to Harry with the easy generosity of someone who has grown up sharing everything. "Your dad," Ron said, in a low voice, "is explaining the London Underground to my dad." "Yes," Harry said. "My dad," Ron said carefully, "is about to cry." "I know. Is your dad? I mean, I don't want to be rude, he's interesting," Harry said. "He's also very, you'll find he takes things seriously. All kinds of things. He finds structure interesting because of what he does. What does he do? Ron asked. Harry looked at Hades across the table, at the gray eyes and the cliff-faced jaw and the tube map held in careful hands, at the man who had said home once and meant it completely. He manages a very large system, Harry said. And everyone eventually comes through it. Ron processed this. Then, being Ron, he applied the specific practical intelligence that ran underneath his apparently simple exterior and said, quietly, everyone? Everyone, Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Harry with a directness that Harry found genuinely valuable, no effect, no social management, just the clean truth of what he was thinking. Does that bother you? Ron asked. Knowing that about everyone you meet? Harry looked at the table. At Fred and George, who had apparently convinced the youngest Weasley girl, Ginny, he'd caught the name, to let Tysus investigate her hand, and Ginny was laughing despite herself, surprised into it. At Persephone and Molly, heads together now, Molly's animated hands and Persephone's warm attention. At Arthur with his tube map and Hades with his careful, approving expression. No, Harry said honestly. It used to feel like wait. Now it feels like knowing that every moment is the only time this version of the moment will exist. He looked at Ron. It makes things more real. Not less. Ron was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he nodded, slowly, with the nod of someone who is genuinely considering an idea rather than simply accepting it, and Harry thought, yes. That one. He's one of the real ones. I think, Ron said, we're going to be friends. Yes, Harry said, and meant it completely, I think we are. The 1st of September arrived with the unceremonious efficiency of all important dates. Harry packed a trunk, an experience that he found interesting mainly because he had never packed a trunk before, having never needed to transport himself and his belongings somewhere on a schedule, and sat on it in his room in the Eleusis house and looked at the window of luminescent garden light for a while. Tysus was already in the bag. The wand was in Harry's pocket. He'd spent several evenings getting used to the way the Elder and Asphodel combination felt, not like learning something new but like becoming more precisely articulate in a language he'd always spoken. His books were in the trunk. The school robes, plain and dark, which Persephone had somehow found time to get precisely fitted without Harry noticing the fitting, because this was one of her specific parental superpowers. Hades was in the doorway. Harry hadn't heard him. Nobody ever heard Hades until he chose, but he was there, leaning against the frame, looking at Harry with the quiet, gray, everything expression. Ready? Hades said. Yes, Harry said. You know what they expect, Hades said. Dumbledore and the rest. They expect a child without resources or information. Someone they can shape. I know. Don't perform ignorance, Hades said. Don't hide. It's not who you are, and it's not who I raised. Harry looked at him. I wasn't going to. Good, Hades said. A pause. Also, if Quirrell makes trouble, you can handle Quirrell. Hades' expression did the private, careful thing. I meant, right. When you want to. Not because you should. He paused again, and Harry recognized the pause as what happened when a man for whom large emotional statements were structurally foreign was making one anyway. It's quiet when you're not there. The garden specifically. Harry stood up from the trunk. He crossed to the doorway and hugged his father, which was something that had taken about a year to establish as a practice. Hades had been unsure, at first, of the procedure, and Harry had been patient with the uncertainty, and now was simply what happened, the way certain things between certain people become simply what happens. Hades' arms closed around him, briefly, firmly, the way his father held everything, with full attention and no drama. I'll write, Harry said, from somewhere against his father's shoulder. I'll shout a message. I'll have Tysus relay. I'll be insufferably communicative. Good, Hades said, and let him go. Persephone was at the bottom of the stairs with a packed breakfast for the train, because she was Persephone and packed breakfasts for important journeys were, in her opinion, non-negotiable. The three of them took the tube to King's Cross, because of course they did, and when Harry pushed through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 and the scarlet engine and the steam and the noise of the wizarding world hit him all at once, 100 families, 100 children beginning something, the collective energy of all those brief lives embarking on a shared threshold, he stopped for a moment at the edge of the platform. Persephone stood at his left shoulder. Hades at his right. Go, Persephone said quietly. Know them. Love them. Be extraordinary. I'm always extraordinary, Harry said. I know, she said, and kissed his forehead, once, precisely, and the small white flowers in her hair bloomed briefly brighter, and Harry felt the warmth of it like sunlight from above the mortal world's surface, felt in the dark gardens of the underworld by the things that grow toward older lights. He stepped onto the platform, into the steam and the noise and the beginning, with the elder wand in his pocket and the god of death and the goddess of spring at his back, and the wizarding world, which had spent 10 years defining itself by his absence, was about to discover that his presence was a considerably more interesting proposition. He found the train. Pushed his trunk in. Looked back once, his parents, standing at the barrier, Persephone with her hand raised, Hades with his hands in his pockets and his exact expression. Not afraid. Not sad. Two gods watching their son walk toward the mortal world with the combined energy of every threshold between winter and spring. Harry waved. Then he turned and stepped onto the train, and the door closed behind him, and he walked forward into the noise and the warmth and the beginning, looking for the compartment where Ron Weasley was probably already arguing about something worth arguing about. He found it. Ron looked up from a window seat, half an Eccles cake in one hand, and said, "Took you long enough," with the easy familiarity of someone who had already decided they were friends and was simply waiting for the formality of confirmation. Harry sat down across from him. The train began to move. The world, for the first time in 11 years, began. Chapter 3, The Sorting Hat argues with a god. The train moved through the English countryside with the particular rhythm of something that has made the same journey so many times it has opinions about it. Harry sat across from Ron, who was eating the rest of the Eccles cake and explaining Quidditch with the systematic enthusiasm of someone presenting evidence for an important theory, and Harry listened with genuine interest because Ron Weasley explaining something he loved was genuinely interesting, not for the Quidditch, which Harry understood already, but for the way Ron's whole face reorganized itself around the subject, the way his hands came up to demonstrate flying maneuvers, the way he'd pause mid-sentence to check whether Harry was actually following or just being polite. Harry was actually following. This seemed to please Ron considerably. The Chudley Cannons haven't won a championship in 300 years, Harry said. Ron stared at him. You know about the Chudley Cannons? I read about them. The history of wizarding sport has some interesting intersections with. Harry stopped, because Ron's expression had moved from surprise to something warmer and more suspicious, and Harry recognized the look. What? You actually read about them, Ron said. Not just because you had to. You read about the cannons. I read about most things, Harry said. The cannons are interesting. The strategic loyalty of their fan base despite an objectively terrible performance record is one of the more compelling examples of. Don't, Ron said, but he was grinning. Analyze my Quidditch team. Too late, Harry said. The compartment door slid open. The girl who came in was carrying a very large book and wearing the expression of someone who had already decided several things about this situation and was prepared to be correct about all of them. She looked at Harry and Ron with the quick, evaluating efficiency of a person running an assessment protocol. Has anyone seen a toad? She said. A boy named Neville's lost one. No, Ron said. Are you two first years? She didn't wait for an answer, which suggested it was rhetorical. I'm Hermione Granger. I've already memorized all the first-year texts and most of the third-year ones, and I've been practicing some of the spells. She said this not boastfully but matter-of-factly, the way you'd present relevant qualifications. Her eyes moved to Harry. Stopped at his forehead. Did the recognition calculation. Came back to his face. You're Harry Potter. Yes, Harry said. I read about you in the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century and notable magical names of our time. She said this as though she expected him to find it reassuring. You're in all of them. I know, Harry said. I've read them too. The section in notable magical names gets several of my aunt and uncle's names wrong, which makes me question the research methodology. Hermione opened her mouth. Closed it. This was clearly not the response the books had led her to expect. Your aunt and uncle's names are in the books. Only incidentally. The lineage section. Harry considered. Though they spell Dursley with an IE instead of a EY, which is a basic error. Hermione sat down, the search for Neville's toad apparently temporarily suspended, and looked at Harry with the recalibrated attention of someone who has updated an assessment. You've actually read the source material, she said. Several times. And you have notes on the accuracy. Some, Harry said. She looked at him. Then at Ron, who had finished the Eccles cake and was watching this exchange with the relaxed attention of someone watching a sport he enjoyed. Then back at Harry. I'll sit here for a moment, she said, and sat down. If that's all right. Yes, Harry said. What followed was 50 minutes of Hermione testing things. Not obviously, she wasn't crude about it, but a consistent low-level probing, questions worked into conversation with the practice technique of someone who had learned that direct inquiry makes people perform knowledge rather than demonstrate it. She asked about the textbooks. She asked about spell theory. She asked, once, about the Hogwarts founders, seemingly casual. Harry answered everything. Not to impress her, he didn't need to impress anyone, but because the questions were interesting and Hermione's mind, he was discovering, had a quality he respected enormously, it was genuinely, structurally rigorous. She didn't accept things because they'd been told to her. She accepted things because she'd tested them. The textbooks are wrong about memory charms, Harry said, mid-conversation, which caused Hermione to go very still. They're not wrong, she said. Obliviation is well documented, the mechanism is wrong. They describe it as erasure. Harry turned the page of the book he'd pulled from his bag without quite deciding to. It's not erasure. It's displacement. The memory isn't gone, it's pushed below the conscious threshold. Which is why partial obliviation has irregular effects. You're not removing something, you're repositioning it. Hermione was quiet for 3 seconds, which he was coming to recognize as her processing time. Where did you read that? Harry thought about Hecate in the Underworld, about the theory of magic as intent applied to reality, about 3 years of studying the architecture of consciousness with someone who had been practicing magic since before most of the books on the Hogwarts curriculum had been written. Various sources, he said. Some of them older than the textbooks. Which ones? I'd like to, I'll find you the references, Harry said, which was a slight simplification of my tutor is a goddess who invented the older system this is built on but was broadly accurate in its implication that the sources existed. Hermione looked at him with the expression she seemed to reserve for genuinely unexpected information, a sharp, bright, wholly unguarded moment of pure intellectual excitement before the composure came back. Right, she said. Yes. Good. Ron caught Harry's eye over her head and gave him a look that said you've made a friend and also possibly created a problem with the eloquent efficiency of someone who communicates primarily in facial expressions. Harry smiled. Neville Longbottom found his toad, his name was Trevor, and he had been located 3 compartments down, apparently charmed into temporary immobility by 2 older students who thought it was funny, until Hermione had reversed the charm with crisp and entirely disproportionate competence, and appeared in the doorway of their compartment looking slightly damp from the earlier rain, slightly uncertain about whether he was welcome, and completely unaware that Harry was watching him with the particular attention he gave to people who carried more weight than they showed. Because Neville Longbottom was carrying something. Harry could see it the same way he could see a soul's history in the meadows, not the details, not the specifics, but the shape. The weight of a life that had been measured against something impossibly large and found wanting, or told it was wanting, which was almost worse. There was an anxiety in him that had deep roots, the kind of anxiety that has been watered by other people's expectations for so long it had started to feel like a personality trait rather than an injury. "Come in," Harry said, before Hermione could make the invitation, because Hermione's invitation would have been correct but slightly efficient, and Harry wanted Neville to feel the specific quality of welcome that didn't come with assessment attached. Neville came in. Sat down. Held Trevor against his chest with both hands in the manner of someone who needed something to hold on to. Looked at Harry. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "So I keep being told," Harry said pleasantly. Neville blinked. Then, unexpectedly, a small smile, quick and genuine, dawned before he fully noticed he'd done it. "Sorry. Everyone's been saying, on the platform, I know. It's all right." Harry leaned forward. "You're Neville Longbottom." Neville went slightly still. "You know me?" "I know of you. Your parents were Aurors. They were very brave people, who fought against the same people who came after mine." Harry kept his voice even, careful. This was a threshold, one of the social kind, the ones that required the same precision as the physical ones. "You know about mine. I thought it was fair to know about yours." Neville's expression moved through several things quickly: surprise, something raw and grateful, the swift closing of a door that wasn't quite used to being opened. My parents aren't, I know," Harry said. "I'm sorry." This was not a comfort reflex. Harry had spent years with the dead, had learned that the most meaningful response to grief was the plain acknowledgement of it, no softening, no solution offered, just the clear-eyed acceptance that the thing was real and it mattered. Neville seemed to hear this in it, his shoulders dropped slightly, something releasing. "Thank you," Neville said, quietly. Ron, who had been quiet during this exchange with the sensitivity he deployed when situations required it, said, "Trevor looks like he's planning something," and pointed at the Toad, who had turned to face the door with an expression of focused intention, and the mood shifted cleanly, the way Ron could shift a mood, not by ignoring what had been said but by stepping past it at the right moment. Neville looked at Trevor. "He does do that," he said. "Right before he makes a run for it." "He's made 3 escape attempts today," Hermione observed. "The charm I used is only temporary, the original one. He doesn't like enclosed spaces," Neville said, and there was a warmth in his voice talking about the Toad that was interesting, the voice of someone who had spent a lot of time with a small creature as the primary recipient of their affection. "He keeps trying to find a window." Harry looked at Trevor. Trevor looked at Harry, with the steady, assessing gaze of an amphibian that had been extensively handled by a variety of humans and had opinions about them. Harry looked back. Something passed between them, recognition of the kind that crossed species when one of the species was partially divine and connected to every living thing's fundamental frequency. "Here," Harry said, and opened the window beside him 2 inches. Trevor immediately repositioned himself against Neville's chest, facing the fresh air, and settled. His eyes closed by half. The focused escape planning expression dissolved. "How did you know that would work?" Neville asked. "He wanted to feel connected to outside," Harry said. "He wasn't actually going to jump. He just needed to know he could." He paused. "Some things are like that." Neville looked at him. Long enough that Harry could see the thought process, the connecting of this statement to something Neville understood personally, the quiet internal recognition of yes, that is in fact what I also am like. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Hermione had pulled out a book which was her response to emotionally rich moments, not coldness, but the comfort of structure. Ron had found another piece of food from somewhere. Outside the windows the countryside was darkening, the flat green of the Midlands rolling into the suggestion of hills, the sky going the specific English autumn combination of grey and amber. Harry leaned back against his seat and watched it all, the 4 of them, the darkening countryside, the approaching certainty of Hogwarts, and felt something he recognized from Persephone's most specific lesson, the threshold moment. The moment of before that you can only recognize as before when something significant is about to change into after. He let himself feel it fully, the way Persephone had taught him. Let it be real. Then the train went into a tunnel and the darkness came and he was entirely comfortable in it, which was perhaps the most useful thing his childhood had given him. The boats were Hermione's favorite part, Harry could tell. The lake was wide and black and the castle rose from its edge the way it had always existed in Harry's imagination of it, old, large, complicated by centuries, its towers at irregular heights because it had grown the way living things grow, according to necessity and impulse rather than plan. He could feel the magic in it from the water's surface, the deep settled warmth of a place where power had been practiced for 1,000 years, layered like geology. Neville's boat was heading slightly wrong. Harry's hand moved once, barely a gesture, more an intention, and the current shifted just enough that the boat corrected without anyone noticing why. "Did you just?" Ron said, low. "Current," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "Right," Ron said, after a moment, in the tone of someone filing information for later consideration and being pragmatic about it. Hagrid led them through a side door, through passages, upstairs, to a small chamber off the entrance hall where the noise of the great hall was audible through the wall, 400 students plus teachers plus a castle that had its own opinions about the proceedings. Professor McGonagall met them there. Harry had read about Professor McGonagall. The reading had not been inaccurate, he found. She was exactly the impression she gave on paper, which was the impression of a woman who had found efficient and no-nonsense to be so thoroughly her nature that she had stopped finding it remarkable. She scanned the first years with the professional assessment of someone deciding where to invest her energy. Her eyes stopped on Harry. Not with the trembling lip of the witch on the train, not with Tom the barman's cautious assessment, not with Ollivander's water-still recalibration. McGonagall looked at Harry the way a teacher looks at a student they're already planning to work hard for, not in pity, not in strategy, but in a clean, uncomplicated recognition of here is someone worth teaching. Harry liked her immediately. She explained the sorting in the efficient terms of someone who had done it 40 times and saw no reason to make theater of it. The hat. The houses. The expectations. She said it all with a kind of brisk respect for the tradition that acknowledged it was meaningful without requiring elaborate ceremony about it, and then went back through the door to give some signal Harry couldn't see. "A talking hat?" Hermione said, to no one in particular, in the tone of someone filing this under unexpected but catalogued. "Enchanted over 1,000 years ago," Harry said. "The founders put their collective intelligence into it so the sorting would continue past their deaths. It's one of the oldest continuously active enchantments in Britain." "How do you know that?" Hermione said. "I read the history. The books don't say that." "Some books do," Harry said. Hermione's jaw set slightly with the specific expression of someone who was going to find those books. Ron made the face of a man watching two people start a competition that would last for years. They filed into the great hall. Harry had been expecting to be impressed and was, but not by what he'd expected. The ceiling was the thing, sky above it, or the magic of sky, the illusion of open night complete with clouds moving slowly over stars, and the candles floating in their hundreds, and the long tables, and the faces of 400 students all turned toward the first years. He felt the magic of the room like a chord, multi-toned and old. He also felt the specific texture of the space at the head table, where the teachers sat, and there, between the turban of Professor Quirrell and the watchful intelligence of Professor McGonagall, at the center of the high table with half-moon spectacles and silver hair and the expression of a man who had built something complex and was about to see one of his foundations shift, Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore's eyes found Harry in the first-year line immediately. Harry had expected this. He met the old man's gaze with the calm directness of someone who has absolutely no reason to look away. Dumbledore's expression was interesting. Not what Harry had expected, which was strategizing or assessment. What he saw first was genuine relief, the relief of a man who has been worried about something for 10 years and has now seen it walk through the door apparently intact. Then, immediately after, the recalibration. The slowing. The careful, intelligent rereading of what he was seeing that Harry recognized as a first-class mind encountering unexpected data. Harry gave him the smallest nod. A courtesy. Dumbledore blinked. Then the Sorting Hat began to sing. The sorting went alphabetically, which meant Harry had time to watch. He noticed the way each student approached the stool with their particular species of anxiety or nonchalance, noticed what the hat said or didn't say, noticed the response of each table when a new member was sent to them. He noticed that the Slytherin table, when Draco Malfoy was sorted into it in under 4 seconds, applauded with a specific kind of enthusiasm that had hierarchy in it, the welcome given to someone expected. He noticed Neville, hands white on Trevor as he climbed to the stool, the hat taking a long time, Neville's face going through everything until it called Gryffindor and Neville nearly fell off the stool with relief, the Trevorless hand catching himself, the smile breaking through so wide and real it made something in Harry's chest do the thing. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet in the specific way a hall goes quiet when a name it has been discussing for 10 years is said aloud in it. Harry walked to the stool. Sat down. The Sorting Hat dropped over his eyes. Darkness. The comfortable kind. Well, said the hat. This is different. Hello, Harry said. The hat was quiet for a moment with the quality of quiet that indicated it was reading, doing the thing it had been doing for 1,000 years, the deep trawl through the contents of a mind, the assessment of qualities and inclinations and the spaces between them. You're not, HM. A pause. You're not entirely mortal. No, Harry said. In 1,000 years, the hat said, with the thoughtful tone of something that has been having conversations inside people's heads since before most of the books in the library were written, I have sorted kings and cowards and geniuses and fools and at least 3 people who were lying to themselves so thoroughly that I had to stop and have a philosophical moment. But I have never, it said, sorted a god. Half god, Harry said. Roughly. The god half, the hat said, is not negligible. No, Harry agreed. Another pause, longer. Harry could feel it reading, not the surface things, not the preferences and fears that it found in most students, but the deeper structure, the architecture of what he was. He didn't close anything off. He didn't need to. You do well in any of them, the hat said, and this had the tone of truth rather than flattery. The courage of Gryffindor, obvious. The wisdom of Ravenclaw, yes, and considerably deeper than most I put there. The patience of Hufflepuff, you have endurance that those children can't conceive of yet. The ambition of Slytherin, no, Harry said, quite clearly. No. Not Slytherin. The ambition is there, yes. But Slytherin's ambition is acquisitive. What I have is, directional. I know what I'm for. A pause. Slytherin would be accurate. It wouldn't be right. Those are different things, the hat observed. Yes. The hat seemed to consider this with the attention it deserved. And Gryffindor? Harry thought about Neville on the stool, the white knuckles and the wide smile. Thought about Ron, an Eccles cake and a direct question asked with complete sincerity. Thought about what Persephone had said, let them know you. Thought about the specific weight of a life measured against impossible standards and found, somehow, the courage to keep going anyway. Yes, Harry said. Gryffindor. Then we agree, the hat said. That doesn't happen often, you know. Most students, I know, Harry said. Thank you. One thing, the hat said, before it called the house. The old man at the center table. Be patient with him. I know what he's done, Harry said. And what he intended. He loves this world, the hat said. He's simply forgotten that love isn't the same as ownership. I know that too, Harry said. Yes, the hat said, and its voice had something in it that was not quite warmth but was warmth's older sibling. You would. Then, loudly, to the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to McGonagall, who looked at him with the expression of a woman who had been watching the hat for 40 years and had just watched it take 45 seconds longer than its median deliberation time. Her look asked a question she was professionally disinclined to voice. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table. The table moved around him, making space, the twins appearing from somewhere and patting his shoulders with the enthusiastic welcome of people who had decided 3 days ago in a London cafe that he was someone they were interested in. Ron appeared. He'd been sorted while Harry was in the hat's dark, Gryffindor in 30 seconds, which somehow surprised no one, and shuffled along the bench to make room. Neville was already there. Trevor finally settled in a pocket, smiling at Harry with the specific relief of someone who has found a familiar face in new territory. Harry sat down. Picked up his fork. The food appeared, which he would never stop finding impressive, the sheer logistics of it, the magic of production and appearance, the gleaming dishes, and around him the feast began, and the hall filled with noise, and he was here. Actually here. In the mortal world, at its most earnest and young and hopeful, with the candles floating above and the stars beyond the enchanted ceiling and the people around him burning with their brief brilliant lives. He ate and listened and was, for a while, simply present. Until, across the table, he felt the flicker of Voldemort's fragment. Eyes up, Quirrell, 3 seats from Dumbledore, looking into his food. The touch of it was brief, accidental probably, some passive radiation of the parasite on the back of his head. Harry filed it and looked away. What's wrong? Ron said, low, because Ron had apparently already developed the observation skills to notice that something had changed in Harry's expression. Nothing urgent, Harry said. Tell me about the ghosts. Ron, who had 17 years of Weasley Hogwarts stories to draw on, began immediately, and Harry listened, and the feast went on. Later, after the portraits had moved and the staircases had shifted, Fred was correct, Harry confirmed, and the Gryffindor common room had been revealed in its comfortable red and gold earnestness, and the dormitory assigned, and the other boys in the dorm, Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, Neville, Ron, had variously marveled at Harry's snake, at the Elder Wand, it's older than the usual ones, look at the, Hermione had said, appearing in the doorway to deliver a book she thought Harry might want, which was very much against dormitory protocol and which she overrode with the cheerful disregard for rules that didn't seem important that Harry found he deeply admired in her, and gone to sleep. Harry sat on the window seat of the dormitory and looked out at the grounds. The lake was dark and still, and the forbidden forest was a mass of deeper shadow on the edge of the grounds, and above it all the sky was the clear autumn black of a night with no light pollution, which was one of the things about the Hogwarts grounds that mortals who never studied the sky didn't notice but was extraordinary. Tysus was on his arm, cool and awake. There is old power here, Tysus said, in the liquid syntax of Parseltongue. In the stones. Yes, Harry said, in the same language. 1,000 years of it. And something wrong, Tysus said. Under the school. Through 3 locked floors. Harry had felt it too. Faint, below everything, the specific vibration of something being kept in place rather than at rest, something active, something conscious of its own confinement. Not a soul. Not a creature exactly. Something old and specific that had been placed here deliberately. He'd read about the philosopher's stone in the mortal histories, the alchemist's work, the myth of immortality in physical form. Flammel. The stone. He'd known Dumbledore had moved it here before the year started, had known from the Underworld's view of events that certain pieces were in motion. Not tonight, Harry said to Tysus. We see it first. We understand it before we move. And the piece of the wrong one? Tysus said, meaning Voldemort's fragment, which Tysus had felt the moment Quirrell walked into the great hall and had spent the feast sitting in Harry's bag radiating cold displeasure in the direction of the teacher's table. That too, Harry said. We watch. Tysus settled, satisfied with this. Harry leaned against the cold window glass and looked out at the grounds, at the lake, at the forest. He thought about what the Sorting Hat had said. He loves this world. He's simply forgotten that love isn't the same as ownership. He thought about Dumbledore at the feast, watching him with the intelligence of a man revising a plan. The plan, Harry knew its broad shape from what Hades had told him, what Persephone had implied, what the Underworld's long memory of the Wizarding War had preserved, was elegant in the way that plans built around sacrifice were elegant. A boy kept small and uninformed, arriving at Hogwarts needing guidance, guided to a specific destiny, used as a weapon that didn't know it was a weapon. Harry was not angry about this. He'd thought he might be, when he understood it, the coldness of it, the use of a child as a strategic asset, but what he felt was something more like the precise sadness of watching someone get the math wrong. Dumbledore had built something genuinely good, this school, this world, and had also built, alongside it, a plan that required a child to be less than he was. The child had turned out to be more than he was. That was the problem Dumbledore was going to have to solve, and Harry was willing to be patient with him solving it, because the hat had said be patient, and also because Harry was 11 years old in appearance and 8,000 years old in the specific ways that matter about patience. A knock at the dormitory door. Harry turned. Not the door, nobody had knocked on the physical door. The knock had been on a different kind of threshold, the kind that shadows use, the kind that only he could hear. He stood up and went to the darkest corner of the dormitory, where the shadow pooled under a wardrobe, and put his hand against it. A message. From Hades, through the shadow network, not words exactly, because divine communication through shadow doesn't work in words the way mortals use them. More like tone and impression, the content communicated the way music communicates something that language doesn't reach. We're here, was the essence of it. The realm is watching. You're not alone in it. Harry pressed his palm flat against the shadow for a moment, feeling the deep familiar cool of it, the acrid hum, the weight of home. He sent back the single impression of I know, wrapped in the specific frequency of something that was not quite contentment but was its older, more complicated sibling. The shadow stilled. He went back to the window seat. In the morning he would meet his professors. He would be assessed and taught and looked at, and some of the looking would be seeing and some wouldn't, and he was patient with the difference. The first week of classes was a revelation in the specific sense of being revealed to others more than revealing others to Harry. Defense against the dark arts was quarrels, which made the classroom the most structurally interesting room in the school from Harry's perspective, the continuous low-level wrongness of the Voldemort fragment radiating from the back of the turban, the specific smell of garlic and something else beneath it, something old and sharp, and Quirrell himself, whom Harry watched carefully. Quirrell was not a fool. Harry had been prepared for a fool from the way Hermes had described him, but Hermes had a tendency to underestimate people who weren't himself, and Quirrell was not a fool. He was a frightened man, which was different and in some ways more interesting. He'd gone looking for power in a place where power ate the searcher, and now he was hosting it, and the terror had compressed itself into his mannerisms, the stammer, the nervous movement, the garlic, each of them a different layer of armor around a man in permanent, total, unacknowledged fear. Harry sat in the front row of defense, which he chose because it was the position from which he could watch both the teacher and the room, and watched Quirrell move through a lesson on vampires with the precise observation of a diagnostician. Quirrell noticed him noticing. Their eyes met once, briefly, and something flickered in Quirrell's eyes, not Quirrell's own thing but the parasite, a moment of attention from the thing in the turban, cold and assessing and very old. It looked at Harry. Harry looked back with the direct, untroubled gaze of someone who has had exactly this kind of staring contest with death itself and has never lost. The cold thing in the turban blinked first. Quirrell dropped a piece of chalk. Something interesting? Hermione murmured, beside Harry, who had apparently been watching Quirrell with an expression worth noting. The lesson structure, Harry said, which was technically true. He skips the defensive applications and emphasizes the creature mythology. Curious pedagogical choice for defense against the dark arts. Hermione looked at the board. Then at Quirrell. You're right, she said, with the particular sharpness of someone recognizing a genuine observation. He's teaching identification without response strategy. That's backwards, Harry said. Hermione wrote something in her notes. Harry turned back to Quirrell, who was now very carefully not looking at the front row. Transfiguration was McGonagall, who walked in, transfigured the desk into a pig and back in under 4 seconds, and said, "That is transfiguration," with the dry satisfaction of someone making a point through demonstration rather than statement. Harry liked her immediately and with increasing conviction as the lesson went on. She taught the way Hecate taught, from the principle outward, not from the result backward. When they were tasked with transfiguring a matchstick into a needle, Harry looked at the matchstick, considered the molecular rearrangement involved, considered what he knew about material transformation from Hecate's broader teaching, and thought, not the surface of the thing. The nature of the thing. The matchstick became a needle in approximately 2 seconds, which was faster than the established first lesson average by some margin. McGonagall walked over, looked at it, picked it up, turned it over. Set it back down. Do it again, she said. Differently. Harry looked at her. Differently? You changed it. Show me that you know how you changed it. Anyone can get an outcome. Understanding the process is the work. Harry looked at the needle. Back at McGonagall. He appreciated this enormously. Yes, Professor, he said, and turned the needle back to a matchstick deliberately, feeling every stage of the transformation, the material responding to the reversal with the clarity of something that was being understood rather than just changed. McGonagall watched, hands clasped behind her back, expression composed, and Harry thought he saw something move in her eyes, the same thing that had been in them when she'd first looked at him in the line. Worth teaching. Better, she said, and moved on. Ron leaned over from the next desk. You did it in 2 seconds and she told you to do it again. She wanted to make sure I understood it, Harry said. Ron looked baffled. Isn't doing it in 2 seconds proof enough? Of the result, Harry said. Not the understanding. Ron stared at him. You and Hermione, he said, are going to be maddening. Probably, Harry agreed. Potions was Snape. Harry had read about Severus Snape in the same way he'd read about everything, fully, without judgment, with attention to the shape of the life rather than its loudest moments. What he knew was this: a man who had spent his adolescence in the shadow of James Potter's casual cruelty, had turned toward darkness out of the complex mixture of neglect and susceptibility and the need for power that characterized certain kinds of damage, had then turned again at the cost of everything, and had spent the subsequent decade in the specific purgatory of a man doing the right thing for private reasons in a context that gave him no credit for it. The potions classroom was in the dungeons, which Harry found immediately comfortable: cool stone, candlelight, the smell of complex ingredients, the specific atmosphere of a room where precise work was expected and imprecision had consequences. He sat next to Hermione, who had already opened her textbook to the relevant page and was reviewing the lesson content with the preparation of someone who believes in never giving competence a chance to be surprising. Snape entered. The black robes, the dark eyes, the measured movement of a man who had decided long ago that control of a room began with control of his own entrance. He looked at the class with the particular assessment Harry had come to recognize as the look of someone perpetually aware of threat level. His eyes reached Harry. Harry watched the sequence clearly: the first look, rapid inventory of face and scar and expected Potterish assumptions, then the halt, the recalibration, the second look that was slower and more focused. Something crossed Snape's face. Surprise wasn't quite right, more like the correction of a prediction that had been wrong in a direction he hadn't accounted for. He'd been expecting James Potter's son. Whatever he was seeing, it wasn't that. Potter, Snape said, beginning the roll call, his voice giving nothing away. Professor, Harry said, the same neutrality, the same even tone. Snape moved through the roll. Then, as I will only be teaching you the most sophisticated and exacting art in this school, I expect silence, precision, and the ability to follow instructions. A pause, the dark eyes moving across the room. Potter. He turned to the board without waiting. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class went slightly tense. Harry heard Ron shift beside him, the rustle of Hermione's nearly raised hand being suppressed. Harry looked at Snape. Snape looked back with the focused expression of a man who had designed this question as a test and was interested in what particular flavor of failure it would produce. The draught of living death, Harry said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. The asphodel, which is a member of the lily family, incidentally, combined with the wormwood produces a cataleptic state indistinguishable from death at standard vital sign assessment. A pause. The asphodel is also traditionally associated with the realm of the dead in Hellenic mythology, which you probably know. The name itself comes from the Greek. A silence. Snape was very still. The dark eyes had gone from testing to reading in the specific way Harry recognized, the shift from performing competence to actually encountering it. Where would I find a bezoar? Snape said, the same neutral tone. Stomach of a goat. Or if you're in a hurry and the goat is unavailable, the same protective principle can be achieved with, Harry stopped. That one might be outside the curriculum. It is, Snape said. Where did you read that? Sources outside the standard texts, Harry said. Some older than the curriculum. Snape studied him for a moment that lasted exactly as long as a moment of genuine reassessment requires. Then he turned to the board and wrote the lesson instructions without comment, which from Snape, Harry was already intuiting, was a kind of acknowledgement. After class, in the corridor, Ron exhaled so loudly it was practically a speech. He didn't take points, Ron said. Snape. He usually destroys Gryffindors in the first lesson. My brother Fred said he once took 30 points from Gryffindor in the first 5 minutes. He was testing, Harry said. I gave him information instead of performance. It changes the dynamic. You knew all of that, Hermione said, not accusingly but with the hunger of someone who needs to understand the source. The asphodel and the lily family connection, I didn't have that in my notes. It's in the etymology, Harry said. The plant's history. It doesn't come up in the standard potions curriculum because the curriculum focuses on application rather than context. He looked at her. I'll share the references. You keep saying that, Hermione said. I keep meaning it, Harry said. Hermione's mouth did a small complicated thing, trying not to smile the way you try not to smile when you found something unexpectedly good, and she walked ahead with her book, and Ron fell into step beside Harry with the easy companionability that was already, after less than a week, becoming simply how they moved. You know, Ron said, you could probably just coast through everything here. I know, Harry said. But you're not going to. No. Because? Ron asked, the same direct simplicity. Because they deserve the real thing, Harry said. McGonagall, Snape, even Quirrell, though for different reasons. He paused. If I'm going to be here, I'm going to be here. Ron thought about this for a moment. That's actually a really decent way to look at it, he said. I learned from good people, Harry said. Your parents seem, your dad is, he's a lot, Harry agreed, with affection. My dad came home and talked about the tube map for 2 hours, Ron said. I think he might put it on the wall. Tell him I'll get him a full map, Harry said. All the lines. There are more than the ones on the pocket version. Ron grinned, wide and bright and entirely Ron. He'll actually cry. Tell him Death says the organizational structure is impressive. Ron made the face of a man not sure if he should repeat that message. I'll paraphrase, he said. Dumbledore found Harry at the end of the second week. Not formally, no office summons, no letter. Simply, Harry was in the library after dinner, sitting alone with a stack of books that was perhaps more extensive than the average first-year's recreational reading, and Dumbledore sat down across from him with the unhurried ease of a man who is never formally seeking anything but is always, in practice, seeking something. Harry looked up. Set down his book. Waited. Dumbledore smiled, the warm one, the one with the twinkle, the one that Harry knew from reading and now confirmed in person was genuine. Whatever else Dumbledore was, the warmth was not performance. That mattered. You're not quite what I expected, Dumbledore said pleasantly. No, Harry agreed. I've been trying to find the right opening to this conversation for 2 weeks, Dumbledore said, with a self-aware lightness that acknowledged the game without making it crude. And I find I keep coming back to the direct approach. Usually the best one, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon spectacles. His eyes were blue and very, very old, and they were doing the same reading that the hat had done, not magic exactly, just intelligence that had been operating for a very long time. Your Transfiguration professor tells me you're extraordinary in her class. She told me the process matters more than the result, Harry said. I'm trying to learn the process. She also tells me, Dumbledore said, conversationally, that you have knowledge considerably beyond your years in primary schooling. I've had good tutors, Harry said. Indeed. A pause. I tried to find you, you know. After your parents, after that night. I wanted to place you somewhere, carefully. I had a plan for your safety. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You know. My parents told me. Both sets. Harry met the blue eyes directly. I know about the blood wards. About the Dursleys. About the shape of what you intended. And? Dumbledore said, with the measured care of someone asking a question they genuinely don't know the answer to, which Harry suspected was not a sensation Dumbledore had experienced often in recent decades. You made a plan based on a version of me that doesn't exist, Harry said, without heat, without anger. The plan wasn't cruel in intent. It was a mistake in assessment. He folded his hands on the table. I'm not that child. I was never going to be that child, the shadows were talking to me at age 4. But even if they hadn't been, the Dursleys were, he stopped. That part of the plan was wrong. Dumbledore was very still. In his eyes something moved that was not calculation, was something older and quieter, the thing that moves in very old people when they are confronted with a consequence of their decisions and have enough self-honesty to sit with it. Yes, he said. That part was wrong. Harry looked at him. I'm not here to undo your work, Harry said. This school is genuinely good. What you've built, most of it is good. Most, Dumbledore said, catching the qualifier. The rest, Harry said, we can work on. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. The library was nearly empty, a few older students at distant tables, the ambient warmth of 1,000 years of accumulated books. When he spoke, his voice had lost the careful, slightly theatrical quality he usually applied to significant moments, and what was underneath was something simpler and considerably more real. You're not afraid of me, he said. No, Harry said. May I ask why? Harry thought about the right answer to this. Not the complicated one, the divine parentage, the years in the underworld, the structure of a being who had already held everything he might possibly have to face and found it manageable. The simpler one. Because you love this world, Harry said. People who love things are not people I'm afraid of. They're people I can work with. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, your father is very unusual. Yes, Harry said. I've felt him before. Not seen, felt. In places where, I've been at deathbeds, over the years. I've felt that quality. He looked at his hands briefly. It was cold. What I felt. He's not cold, Harry said, and the certainty in his voice was not defensive but was absolute. He's precise. There's a difference. Dumbledore looked at him. Then he nodded, once, slowly, with the nod of a man genuinely revising something. Yes, he said. I think there is. He rose. Set his hands on the back of the chair. There is something in this school, he said, that needs protecting this year. I suspect you already know what it is. I suspect I do, Harry said. I would rather, Dumbledore said carefully, that you let the adults handle it. I'd rather handle it appropriately, Harry said, with complete pleasantness, whatever that turns out to mean. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with the blue eyes and the silver hair and the weight of decades of impossible decisions. Then he smiled, not the twinkle, but a different smile, one that had something rueful and something respectful mixed into it in roughly equal proportions. "I imagine," he said, "that this is what it feels like to meet someone who has read ahead in the text." "More like," Harry said, "someone who wrote a different book." Dumbledore left. Harry watched him go, then looked back at his books, and thought about what the hat had said, "Be patient with him," and decided that patience and clarity were not in conflict. He could be both. He picked his book back up. The library settled around him. Somewhere below, in the third-floor corridor that everyone had been told to stay away from, something old and deliberate pulsed with its contained purpose. Harry turned a page. The night moved on. The candles burned. Chapter 4, What Lives Beneath the Third Floor. October arrived in the Hogwarts grounds the way October always arrives in Scotland, decisively, without apology, turning the trees along the lakeshore to copper and gold overnight and dropping the temperature by 10 degrees while everyone was still wearing September clothing. Harry found he liked it. The cold suited him the way most things associated with transition suited him, the particular quality of a world actively changing from one state to another. He was on the Quidditch pitch at 6 in the morning when most of the castle was still asleep, which was where he'd been every Tuesday and Thursday since Madame Hooch's first flying lesson 3 weeks ago had ended with Harry chasing Neville's Remembrall across the sky and McGonagall appearing on the ground below with the expression of a woman who has just witnessed something she needs to immediately make use of. She'd made him Gryffindor Seeker before he'd landed. He'd been practicing alone at dawn not because he needed the practice. The broom responded to him with the willing ease of everything that moved, of everything that crossed from one place to another, which was his fundamental nature, but because he liked it. The particular sensation of high altitude and cold air and speed, the way the castle looked from above, all its complicated irregular towers and the lake like hammered pewter beyond it, the ground still half in morning mist. The world made smaller and more comprehensible from sufficient height. Also, he'd found that thinking was easier on a broomstick. Something about the physical occupation of his body freed the rest of him to work. He was thinking about Quirrell. It had been building for 3 weeks, the specific pattern of what the Voldemort fragment was doing through its host. Harry had been watching with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who knows what a soul's architecture looks like and could see exactly where this one was fraying. Quirrell's own soul was still there, thin, terrified, increasingly compressed by the passenger, but there. The fragment used him through fear, kept the access open through Quirrell's own desperate compliance, and in return gave him what he'd originally gone looking for, enough power to feel capable, enough proximity to the kind of magic he'd never have reached alone to feel the vertigo of it. What the fragment wanted was below the third floor. Harry had worked that out in the second week. Could feel the stone's specific frequency, old alchemical magic, human reaching toward immortality with the focused ingenuity that mortals applied to the things they were most afraid of. He found it genuinely moving, the stone's existence. The sheer effort it represented. But the fragment was getting stronger. Quirrell made regular trips toward the third floor, never all the way, not yet, held back by whatever protections Dumbledore had layered over the entrance, and each time he came back, the cold thing in the turban was a fraction more settled in him, a fraction more at home. Harry banked into a wide arc over the pitch and thought, how long before Quirrell isn't the one making the decisions anymore? He landed, and Hermione was standing at the edge of the pitch in a winter cloak with a book under her arm, which was so entirely Hermione that Harry smiled despite himself. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 12 minutes, she said. "I was going to the library but I saw you from the path and," she stopped. Looked at the broom, then at him, with the expression she wore when deciding between two different questions. "You don't practice like someone who needs to practice." "No," Harry agreed. "You practice like someone thinking through something else," she said. "Yes." She considered this with the precision she applied to most things, and then decided to ask the second question rather than the first. "Is it about Quirrell?" Harry looked at her. "What makes you say that?" Because in defense last Tuesday you spent the entire class watching him instead of the lesson, and I was watching you watch him, and whatever you were seeing, she pressed her lips together briefly. It wasn't vampire mythology. Harry studied her. Hermione Granger was 2 months into Hogwarts and had already, through pure observational acuity and the refusal to let things go unexplained, assembled more accurate information about the situation than most of the adults in the castle. He felt the specific respect he felt for excellent minds encountering genuine mysteries and refusing to be satisfied with surface answers. "Walk with me," he said. They walked along the edge of the lake, where the mist was still thick and the castle only half visible above it, a suggestion of towers. Harry told her, not everything, not the parts that were his to keep, but the visible shape, Quirrell's behavior, the regular late-night movements toward the 3rd floor, the thing Harry had felt in Diagon Alley that had been too specific and too cold to be anyone other than the one person everyone in the wizarding world was pretending might not exist. Hermione was quiet throughout. Not the quiet of someone overwhelmed, the quiet of someone building a model, fitting pieces together, checking the structure as it went up. "You think he's trying to get something from the 3rd floor," she said. "I think he's working up to it," Harry said. "He's not ready yet. Something's stopping him." "The protections Dumbledore mentioned," Hermione said immediately. "The staff each contributed one. It's not in any book but it's been in the rumors since September." She paused. "You already knew that?" "Yes." "So what are you waiting for?" she said. Not impatiently, genuinely asking. Harry looked at the lake. A tentacle broke the surface briefly and withdrew, the giant squid conducting its own morning routine below the pewter water. "I want to know the whole shape of it before I move," he said. "And I want to understand Quirrell better. He's not just a carrier, he's a person. He made choices that led here. Understanding the choices tells me something about how this ends." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Then, you're going to try to help him too? If there's something to help. And if there isn't?" Harry thought about the fragment thing in the turban, the cold ancient terror of something that had split itself so many times it barely remembered what wholeness felt like. Thought about what Hades had said in the Judgment Hall, 100 times, 1,000, what we do when we're afraid is not the full measure of who we are. "Then it ends," he said. "But I'll know I tried." Hermione looked at him for a moment with the full force of her attention, which was not a comfortable thing to be on the receiving end of and which Harry bore without flinching because he'd been looked at by gods and the dead and didn't find an 11-year-old's regard destabilizing, however exceptional the 11-year-old. Then she said, "I want to help." "I know," Harry said. "Don't tell me it's dangerous," she said preemptively. "Everything interesting is dangerous," Harry said. "That's not a reason." "You're in." Hermione exhaled. "Right," she said, and opened her book, which she'd apparently been using as a prop for the walking and talking portion of the morning, because she turned immediately to a section she'd already tabbed. "I've been researching the protections. Dumbledore uses wards with a musical component. There are historical precedents in Byzantine magical tradition that use harmonic frequencies to establish threshold barriers. If Quirrell is struggling to breach it, it might be because, Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. "Breakfast first," he said. She looked at him. "The Byzantine harmonic wards are important." "Breakfast is also important," Harry said. "We can cover both." She made the face of someone who technically agreed but was filing an objection. "Fine. But I'm bringing the book." "Obviously," Harry said. The troll arrived at Halloween. Harry smelled it before Quirrell announced it, the specific high-pitched wrongness of a mountain troll in an enclosed space, the biology of it, something that existed at the wrong end of a very long evolutionary argument. He'd been eating Halloween feast dessert and listening to Ron describe what he'd say to Percy Weasley if Percy were not perpetually within earshot when the Dungeons Troll announcement hit and the Great Hall went into the specific collective chaos of 400 children deciding whether stay calm and move in an orderly fashion was something they were personally equipped to do. The answer was, it was not. Harry stood. He already knew where the troll was, could feel it the way he felt all large, afraid things, the blunt biological panic of a creature too far from its mountain in too small a space. He also knew Hermione was not in the hall. Ron, predictably, arrived at the same conclusion half a second later. She doesn't know, Ron said, over the noise. She went to the bathroom after the main course, she was upset about something. Yes, Harry said. I know. He'd heard it, the sharp exchange in the corridor before the feast, Draco Malfoy's carrying voice and Hermione's silence after it, the silence that meant she'd gone somewhere to be heard in private, which was both deeply understandable and presently inconvenient. Come on. They were moving against the flow of students before the prefects had started their directing, which meant they were in the corridor and headed toward the girls' bathroom before anyone in authority had thought to stop them. The troll's frequency was clear and close, getting closer. The thing moved with the artless momentum of a creature that didn't distinguish between obstacles and space, everything equally compressible from its perspective. Harry turned a corner and stopped. The troll filled the corridor ahead with the authority of something that had never needed to consider proportions. 8 feet and several hundred pounds of grey muscle and the specific blankness of a creature that experienced the world entirely through impact. It hadn't seen them yet. It was methodically destroying a suit of armor that had had the misfortune to be in its path, which it appeared to find the most interesting thing in its immediate environment. Ron made a sound. Not a scream. Ron didn't scream, Harry had already learned. Ron's fear response ran toward frozen specificity rather than vocalization. He just said, very quietly, that is a very large troll. Yes, Harry agreed. What do we, Hermione's in the third door on the left, Harry said, because he could feel her, the specific warm bright candle flame of her, terrified and very still behind a bathroom door. Get her out. I'll handle this. Ron turned to look at him. On Ron's face, very clearly visible, the calculation, the rapid honest assessment, and then the decision. What does handle this mean? Ron said. It means it won't hurt anyone, Harry said. Ron looked at the troll, which had finished with the armor and was now considering the next section of corridor with the expression of something deciding between equally interesting options. Then he looked at Harry, at the complete absence of fear in Harry's posture, at the specific quality Harry projected that Ron had been quietly cataloging since the train, the quality of someone who was not performing confidence because they'd never needed to learn how to. Right, Ron said, and went for the bathroom. Harry walked toward the troll. He didn't run, didn't shout, didn't brandish his wand. He walked with the measured pace of someone who has spent years in the underworld, where the distinction between life and death is a threshold rather than a wall, and has never once found that threshold frightening. The troll's small eyes found him. It stopped destroying the corridor. They looked at each other. The troll was afraid, Harry realized. Not of him specifically, it didn't have the cognitive architecture for specific fear, not yet. It was afraid in the large, undifferentiated way of a thing that had been taken from its natural environment and placed somewhere too small and too loud and too full of incomprehensible stimuli. Everything it was doing, the destruction, the noise, was the biological language of make it stop, make there be space, I don't understand this. Harry crouched down, very slowly, which put him below the troll's eye level. The troll paused. This was unexpected behavior. Nothing in its experience had crouched in front of it. Harry put one hand on the floor, feeling the stone of the castle, the deep old magic in it, the 1,000 years of life and study and passage, the specific resonance of a building that had been a threshold for generations. He let the castle's frequency run up through his palm, up his arm, and then directed it outward, not at the troll but around it, the same warm settling sensation he could produce with shadows, with growing things, with anything that existed at a threshold and could be made to feel the quality of peace rather than the absence of threat. The troll's warclub arm lowered. Slowly. With the deliberate quality of muscle relaxing for the first time in hours. It made a sound. Low, not quite a growl. The sound of a large thing becoming slightly less afraid. Good, Harry said, quietly, to it, in no particular language but with the intention that crossed all of them. Behind him, he heard the bathroom door, Ron's voice, Hermione's quieter response. Then Hermione appeared in his peripheral vision, frozen at the sight of him crouched 3 feet in front of an 8-foot troll. "Harry," she said, in a very controlled voice, "what are you?" "He's afraid," Harry said, not turning. "He needs to go back outside." "Ron, yes." Ron said, from behind Hermione. "Open the corridor window. The large one, at the end." A pause. Then footsteps, and the sound of a window being forced open, the cold night air coming in, the smell of outside, grass and water and the open dark of the Hogwarts grounds. The troll's head turned toward the window. Its nostrils opened wide. Harry stood slowly. Kept the frequency going, the settling, the warm, the safe direction is that way, and took 2 steps back toward Ron and Hermione, creating the clear path he'd been intending since he crouched down. The troll moved. Not charging, walking, with the focused purposefulness of something that has found the direction it wants to go. Down the corridor, past Harry and Ron and Hermione without looking at them, toward the window that was too small for it to fit through, but it could smell the outside through it now, could smell the grounds, and it went through the wall beside the window instead. Which created a troll-shaped hole in the castle's exterior stonework and a considerable noise and a very cold draft in the corridor, but removed the troll from the building with an efficiency that was arguably better than several of the alternatives. Hermione was staring at the troll-shaped hole. "He'll be fine out there," Harry said. "The grounds are big enough. Hagrid will find him in the morning and help him back toward the mountains." Ron looked at the hole. Back at Harry. "You walked up to it," Ron said. "Yes." "You crouched in front of it." "Yes." "And then it walked out through the wall." "Yes." "On purpose?" "You made it do that?" "I made it feel safe enough to follow the direction it already wanted to go," Harry said. Ron processed this for a moment. "Then, that's either the bravest or the most mental thing I've ever seen." "Could be both," Harry said. Hermione had turned from the hole. Her eyes were bright, not from crying, or not just from crying, the specific brightness of someone who has been frightened and angry and is now in the aftermath of something significant. She looked at Harry with the direct, clear attention that was her most characteristic expression, and said, "You weren't frightened at all." "No," Harry said. "Why not?" Harry looked at the hole in the wall where the troll had been. At the cold autumn night beyond it, the grounds, the lake catching starlight. "Everything that's large and afraid and destructive," he said, "got that way because it's trying to go home." "I understand that. It's not frightening." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She crossed the 2 steps between them and hugged him, briefly, efficiently, the hug of someone who is not naturally a hugger but has decided the situation demands it. She released him before it could become a thing, and took a step back, and looked at both of them with the expression of someone officially including 2 other people in something. "Friends," she said. "Right?" "Obviously," Ron said, with feeling. "Obviously," Harry said. McGonagall found them 40 seconds later. The expression on her face upon discovering a first-year-shaped hole where a troll crisis had been, rather than the troll crisis itself, was extraordinary. The morning after Halloween, Harry went to the 3rd floor. Not to the Forbidden Corridor specifically, he'd been in the 3rd floor corridor already, in the first week, at 2 in the morning when the castle was emptiest, standing at the locked door and feeling the protections Dumbledore had layered over it with the careful attention of a student reading a complex text. He'd mapped them without touching them. He wasn't there for the stone. He was there to understand the shape of what Quirrell would have to defeat. He was there on the morning after Halloween because the troll incident had not been accidental. He'd felt the deliberateness of it, Quirrell's specific frequency in the vicinity of the dungeons when the troll was announced, the directness of the detention it had created, the chaos of 400 children and a dozen teachers converging on ground floors and corridors while the 3rd floor sat quiet. An attempt. Abortive either because Quirrell hadn't reached the final protection or because something had interrupted him. The corridor was empty. Harry stood at the locked door, which was exactly as it had been, undisturbed, the protections intact, Fluffy's warmth and weight audible and palpable through the door in equal measure. He put his palm on the door and read it the way he'd learned to read things. No passage. Not last night. So Quirrell had been stopped earlier. Either at the staircase ward or before. You know, said a voice from the portrait 3 feet to his left, you're the 4th student to stand in front of that door this month looking thoughtful. The other 3 looked considerably more nervous. Harry looked at the portrait. An elderly painted wizard in Georgian clothing, looking at Harry with the faded but perceptive eyes of a portrait that had been doing this, watching, listening, filing, for the better part of 2 centuries. Who were the other 3? Harry asked. A tall boy with a turban, the portrait said. Twice. And your red-headed friend, briefly, last week, though he lost his nerve and left fairly quickly. The portrait considered. You're not going to lose your nerve, are you? No, Harry said. Didn't think so, the portrait said, with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has watched too much history to be particularly surprised by any of it. Are you going to do something about what's in there? Eventually, Harry said. Don't leave it too late, the portrait said. That's always the mistake. People leave things too long. He adjusted his painted glasses. The turban boy gets worse every week. You can see it, if you know what to look at. I know, Harry said. Good. The portrait settled back into its usual contemplative stillness. Do be careful. There are floors below the obvious ones. Harry looked at the portrait for a moment. That's very cryptic for a Tuesday morning. I'm a portrait in a castle full of magical children, the portrait said. I'm entitled to the occasional cryptic remark. Harry nodded at him, gravely, as to an equal. The portrait looked pleased. November brought Quidditch. Specifically, it brought the Gryffindor vs. Slytherin match, which the castle treated with the specific collective intensity of an event that had accumulated 11 years of political and historical weight and was expected to deliver on it. Harry found Quidditch interesting for the reasons he found most physical things interesting, not because of the competition, which was real and engaging, but because of what it revealed about the people playing it. The Gryffindor team had the energy of something that had been waiting to be good for a long time and was suspicious of its own goodness. Wood, the captain, had approximately 700 opinions about strategy, each of which he believed in absolutely and none of which he'd been fully able to implement because the team's recent history had been, as Fred described it with elegant fraternal cruelty, mostly athletic tragedy. Harry had changed some of that simply by being what he was on a broom. The team's flying improved around him the way things generally improved in his vicinity, not because of anything he deliberately did but because watching someone operate at genuine ease raised the ambient ceiling of what was considered possible. Fred and George had stopped performing during practice and started actually competing, which Wood found both gratifying and slightly alarming. The match itself was a cold, clear November morning with the specific Scottish blue sky that appeared occasionally between October and December as though by apology. The stands were loud. Harry took his position, felt the broom beneath him and the cold air above and the 60 feet of Scottish autumn sky between him and the ground, and let it all settle into the clear, present awareness he used for everything. He found the snitch 11 minutes in. It was good at being invisible, designed to be, obviously, designed by someone who'd understood that the best hidden things are the ones that hide in plain sight, using the chaotic visual noise of 11 people on broomsticks and a crowd and 2 bludgers to remain perfectly unnoticed at the periphery. Harry saw it the way he saw most things, not looking for it but looking at everything, which meant the snitch's stillness stood out against the motion of everything else, a specific quality of composed waiting. He went for it directly. No banking, no approach to obscure his direction. He'd found early in practice that the snitch's evasion algorithm assumed a curved approach based on historical seeker behavior, so a direct line at speed created a lag in its response. He was 3 body lengths away when it corrected, 1 body length when it got moving, and he caught it a foot above Slytherin's keeper's head with his right hand, clean and complete, the wings beating against his palm. The Gryffindor stands erupted. Harry looked at the snitch in his hand. The small gold thing, wings slowing to stillness, regarding him with the blank dignity of an enchanted object that had just lost an argument with physics. "Good catch," said the Slytherin seeker, Terence Higgs, pulling up beside him. Not gracious exactly, pained, as someone who had been fairly trounced and was choosing honesty as the dignified response. "You read the approach," Harry said. "You had the right calculation, you just needed another second." Higgs looked at him. "You're telling me where I went wrong." "You went mostly right," Harry said. "The correction instinct is good. The angle of interception needs to be wider. You're assuming the standard approach because that's what the training teaches. You need to account for the non-standard seeker." Higgs stared at him for a moment. Then, reluctantly, "That's actually useful." "I know," Harry said, and landed. The rest of the day was celebrations, the common room, Hermione and Ron and Neville and the twins and Dean and Seamus and the warm collective noise of a team that had won and a group of people who were happy together, and Harry sat in the middle of it with the specific contentment of someone who had everything they needed in the current moment and knew it. He felt Quirrell twice during the game. Both times brief, passing, the fragment's attention moved across Harry during the match with the specific quality of something trying to understand what it was looking at. The first time had been when Harry was simply flying. The second had been the moment of the catch. Something about the catch had disturbed the fragment. Harry filed this. That evening, sitting on the dormitory window seat with Tysus warm on his arm and the castle quiet around him, he worked out why. The catch had been perfectly casual. Not effortless in the performed way of someone trying to look capable, effortless in the way of someone for whom the thing is simply not difficult. And Voldemort's fragment, which had spent decades building a mythology around its own exceptional power, had watched an 11-year-old boy catch a snitch as though catching it had been simply the inevitable conclusion of a logical sequence, and something in that had created the first genuine uncertainty the fragment had felt in years. It didn't know what Harry was. Harry had been in Quirrell's class for 3 months and the fragment still couldn't categorize him. It knew what a wizard felt like, the human channeling of magic through will and wand, the specific signature, familiar as a language you've spoken for decades. Harry felt like that, but underneath it, adjacent to it, there was something that didn't fit the category. Something the fragment associated with the oldest magic, the deepest substrate, the things that had existed before wizarding tradition had formalized itself. It was beginning to suspect. Not to know, not yet. But the suspicion was there, and the suspicion was making it careful. Harry rather liked that. Good, he thought. Stay uncertain. It keeps you from doing something I'd have to deal with before I'm ready. He sent a shadow message to Hades that night, not words, just the impression of, building. Patient. Well. The return came within an hour, the quality of acknowledgement, and below it, like a harmony to the main frequency, the warmth of something that was Persephone's particular brand of worry that she refused to call worry. He sent back the warmth of, I know. I'm fine. The castle has good dungeons, you'd appreciate the stonework. The Akron hum pulsed once, almost amused. December arrived and Quirrell's behavior changed. The change was subtle, not in frequency but in quality. The late-night movements toward the third floor became more purposeful, the irregularity of them resolved into something with pattern, something planned. The fragment was doing the thing fragments of fractured souls did when they'd been gathering strength for long enough, it was beginning to believe it could act. Harry increased his attention, which meant he slept less and spent more time in the corridors at night than was officially sanctioned. He'd also begun doing something that he hadn't mentioned to Ron or Hermione, spending 2 hours a week in the Hogwarts Library's restricted section, which required a permission note he'd obtained from McGonagall on the grounds of advanced independent research, which was both true and a significant understatement. What he was reading was not in the standard curriculum. It was the architecture of Horcruxes. He'd known what they were since Hades had explained Voldemort's soul to him in the Underworld, had known the shape of them, the deliberate fracturing, the binding of a soul shard to an object, the desperate attempt to circumvent the threshold that every living thing eventually crossed. He'd also known, from the Underworld's perspective, that they didn't work the way Voldemort thought. You couldn't use them to avoid death. You could use them to delay it while destroying yourself in the process, which was a meaningful distinction that Voldemort had apparently never bothered to make. What he was reading now was the counter-theory. What you did when you found one. The books were old, not all in English, some in Greek and Latin and one in a language that was older than either, that Harry read with the ease of someone who had spent years in the Underworld's library where the oldest texts lived. The answer, when he found it, was both simpler and more demanding than he'd expected. You couldn't destroy them through force. Not standard magical force. The soul shard in a Horcrux was protected by exactly the same principle that made the Horcrux valuable. It was anchored, bound to the physical object so thoroughly that destroying the object destroyed the shard, but the protection worked in reverse, the shard's vitality protecting the object from ordinary damage. What dissolved the anchor was not destruction but, and Harry sat with this for a long time in the still November library, passage. The same principle as crossing the threshold. You didn't destroy the shard. You moved it. You invited it across, which required not force but the quality of the crossing itself, the genuine acceptance of what lay on the other side of the threshold. Which was, Harry thought, turning this over in his mind, remarkably consistent with everything Hades had ever taught him. He could do it. The soul fragment attached to Quirrell's skull, he could invite it across, not violently but with the full attention of someone who presided over exactly this kind of passage. It would require touch. It would require the full expression of what he was. And it would destroy the fragment utterly, which was not something Harry found troubling, because he'd read the history of what that fragment had done and understood that some things were too broken to be repaired and what mercy looked like in those cases was not preservation but release. What he was waiting for was not the ability. He was waiting for Quirrell to make the move. Not because Harry couldn't go to the third floor and solve it unilaterally, he could, at any time, and the protections Dumbledore had placed there would step aside for him because they were threshold-based and Harry was the threshold, but because Quirrell was a man, and the man deserved the same patience Harry gave everything that was acting out of fear. If there was a way to separate the fragment from Quirrell while keeping Quirrell intact, Harry was going to find it. And that required the confrontation to happen on Quirrell's terms, at the moment when the fragment's grip was most complete and therefore most exposed. He was patient. He had been patient his whole life. It was Neville who told him about the cloak. Not deliberately, Neville had overheard something in a corridor and came to Harry the way he'd started coming to Harry with things that didn't fit, directly, quietly, in the voice he used for serious things, which was more grounded than his ordinary voice and therefore more audible. "There's a package for you," Neville said, catching Harry in the corridor after dinner. "From someone. One of the older students was talking about it, a Slytherin 6th year who works in the Ollery said something came in last night, anonymous, with your name on it." Harry retrieved it from the Ollery that night. Brown paper, no sender, his name in a hand he didn't recognize but which carried a specific magical signature, old, careful, the kind of signature that has learned to conceal itself thoroughly. Wrapped inside was silver and gray and fluid as running water, his father's invisibility cloak. A note said, simply, "Your father left this in my possession. APWBD Dumbledore." Harry turned this over. The cloak was real, he recognized it, not personally but through the realm's knowledge of powerful objects, one of the three Hallows, the deathless items that the Peverell brothers had made from Hades' own aspects. The cloak was his father's. Not Hades, it had been in the Potter family line for centuries, passed down from the third Peverell, the one who had been wise enough to simply ask to go unseen and had lived to old age and greeted death as a friend. Harry thought about what Dumbledore was doing. The cloak, anonymous, on Christmas Eve. An invitation. Or perhaps a test, would the famous Harry Potter, given an invisibility cloak, run toward the forbidden corridor to satisfy his curiosity? Would he be that predictable? Harry put the cloak on. Not to go to the third floor. Just to see what it felt like. It felt like being invisible, which was interesting because Harry had very good shadow movement and didn't particularly need a physical object to conceal himself in darkness. The cloak was different, it was a full-spectrum concealment, visible light and magical detection and a specific sense that living things had of other living things nearby. Under it he was, for all practical purposes, not present. He thought, I could go anywhere in this castle and see everything there is to see, and no one would know. He thought, I don't need to. I see clearly enough already. He folded the cloak carefully and put it away, and went back to bed. It was Christmas night, and the castle was very quiet, and below the third floor the stone sat in its protections, patient as alchemical magic always is, old, compressed, waiting. And in the turban on the defense teacher's head, the fragment turned in its uncomfortable housing, increasingly certain it was being watched, unable to find the watcher. Harry slept easily, the way he always slept, dreamless and deep and certain of the dawn. January came, and with it the specific shift in Quirrell's behavior that Harry had been waiting for. The pattern of the late-night movements toward the third floor resolved suddenly, one Thursday in mid-January, into something concrete. Quirrell attempted the third-floor corridor in earnest. Harry knew the moment it started, waking in the dormitory at 1 a.m. to the particular resonance of threshold magic being tested, not broken, not yet, but pressured. He put on his shoes. Took his wand. Did not take the cloak, because he wasn't going to hide. He met Hermione in the common room. I thought you'd be awake, she said. She was fully dressed, which suggested she'd been awake for a while. Her book was open on the armchair beside her. Go back to bed, Harry said. No, she said simply. He looked at her. She looked back with the expression she used for decisions she'd already made and wasn't revisiting. Hermione, I know the protections, she said. I've been studying them all term. I know what each one is and in what order. I've been doing it in case, she paused. In case you needed someone who had. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, the clue I can't use. I've worked out the logic one, she said immediately. The potion's riddle. It'll need 2 people, one to go forward, one to go back. You've been preparing for this, Harry said. Not a question. Since October, she said, with the directness of someone who had accepted being extraordinary at things and moved past false modesty about it. I read the theory. I did the research. I solved the puzzle. I just need, her voice shifted, fractionally, the first layer of composure showing its underside, I need to be useful. Not just the person who's good at exams. Actually useful. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Hermione Granger, who had walked into this world with a book under her arm and the desperate energy of someone who had spent their whole childhood being told their intellect was too much, and had spent 4 months quietly, methodically preparing to be the person who solved the problem when it came. You're already useful, he said. You've been useful since the train. Her jaw tightened briefly. I know, she said. I mean, I know what you mean, Harry said. Come on. Ron appeared on the stairs. I heard movement, he said. Are we? Yes, Harry and Hermione said simultaneously. Ron exhaled. Right, he said, with the tone of a man who had assessed the situation and arrived at acceptance with remarkable speed. Let me get my wand. The third-floor corridor was broken when they arrived. Not destroyed, the door was intact but the ward on it was wrong, fraying at the edges, the harmonic frequency of it disrupted in the way that force applied to music disrupts it, not cleanly but messily, the notes still sounding but no longer true. Harry pressed his palm to it. Quirrell had gone through perhaps 40 minutes ago. Behind the door, Fluffy was asleep. Not naturally, drugged, the smell of it in the air, something in a harp that had been playing itself until the strings ran out and now sat in the corner, silent. Fluffy sprawled across the trapdoor with the vast unconscious weight of a sleeping Cerberus analog, and in the gap around the trapdoor edge, the faint warmth of something that had passed through recently. He went down, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Hermione was already looking at the harp. Charmed to play the sleeping melody. It stopped but the charm is still active, I can restart it. She looked at Harry. You're going down. We're going down, Harry said. No, Hermione said, with the specific certainty of someone who has made a decision and means it. You are. You and Ron. I'll restart the harp, manage Fluffy, and wait at this end in case Quirrell comes back this way. I know the return route. She held his gaze. The problem below is the potion's riddle. I've given you the answer. She pressed a folded piece of parchment into his hand. Go. Harry looked at her. You worked all of this out so you could stay at the top and be the last line. I worked all of this out so we'd survive it, she said. Stop arguing with sensible deployment. Ron made a sound that was almost a laugh, cut short by the gravity of the situation. She's right, he said. I know she's right, Harry said. He put the parchment in his pocket. He touched Hermione's shoulder briefly, the same brief press that she'd given him in the troll corridor, the kind of contact that said you are real to me and this matters without requiring elaboration, and she nodded, once, and turned to the harp. Harry went to the trapdoor and opened it, and below was the dark. He dropped through without hesitation, Ron a heartbeat behind him, and the dark of the underworld was nothing to Harry, nothing at all. The fall was just a fall and the roots of Devil's Snare waiting at the bottom were, Harry, Ron said from somewhere above, with the voice of someone being steadily throttled. Hold still, Harry said, feeling the plant's tendrils, feeling its nature, a growing thing, following its programming, reaching toward warmth and weight. He put his hands in the roots and spoke to them the way Persephone had taught him to speak to growing things, not commanding but engaging, one living thing to another, the language of you don't need to do this, the food is elsewhere, the light is elsewhere. The tendrils loosened with the compliance of something that had been told what it actually needed. They dropped through. The winged keys were chaos, hundreds of them, the specific magical density of an enchantment that used volume as its primary defense, every key identical except the one that wasn't. Harry looked at the swarm and felt the wrongness of one against the pattern of all the others, the specific resonance of a recently used thing. The door had been opened recently, which meant the key had been disturbed, which meant, third row from the top, left side, a 15th century key with a bent left wing. He could see the way it was working too hard to look the same as all the others, the minor overcorrection of something trying to restore a disrupted pattern. Harry called it the way you called a thing that understood being called, a single focused intention, and it came to his outstretched hand like a bird to a familiar arm. Through the door, the chess set. He'd known about the chess. Ron had been talking about chess since September with the focused passion of someone for whom it was the primary medium of intellectual expression, and Harry had played him repeatedly enough to understand that Ron Weasley's chess was not the chess in the books, it was something more instinctive and more dangerous, built on the understanding of psychology rather than pure calculation, the read of an opponent rather than the abstract solving of a problem. The chess set was large. Enormous, white marble against black stone, and the pieces were fully sized and looked at them with the focused attention of things designed to serve the purpose they'd been given, which was preventing passage through this room. Me, Ron said. I need to play. I know, Harry said. Ron stepped onto the board. He walked through the pieces with the contained attention Harry had seen him deploy during their dormitory games, the assessment of a mind that sees chess the way other people see conversation, as the full honest revelation of how another mind works. He took his position. You're a bishop, Ron said to Harry. Far right. Don't move until I say. All right, Harry said. The game lasted 14 minutes. Harry played his single bishop move when Ron directed it, and spent the rest of the time watching Ron dismantle an enchanted chess opponent that had been designed by a master of the game and had presumably never encountered someone who treated every opponent as a genuine personality to be read rather than a system to be solved. The white pieces moved with the automatic elegance of excellent programming. Ron moved against them with something that wasn't programmable at all. Knight to f5, Ron said, for the final time, and the white queen looked at the board for a long moment, the enchanted intelligence of it running its calculations, and then did something chess opponents do when they have genuinely lost. It swept its crown off its head and set it on the board in a gesture that was not programmed but was the piece's own response to being properly beaten. The path to the far door opened. Go, Ron said. Come with, someone has to stay with the board, Ron said. The chess game had left him slightly winded but entirely clear-eyed, the look of someone who has used everything they had and is satisfied with the expenditure. The pieces reset after someone crosses them. If you need to come back, I'll be here. Harry looked at him. Ron looked back with the same clear, direct quality that had said "Are you alright" on a London train and had meant it completely. I'm fine here, Ron said. Go do the thing. Harry went through the door. The troll was already down. Not killed, Quirrell had simply knocked it unconscious with more force than was necessary, which was informative. The fragment, when it was in control, didn't differentiate between stopped and destroyed. Harry stepped over it without ceremony. The potions room was small and cold and smelled of stone and old magic. 7 bottles on a table, a parchment riddle, flames blocking the entrance and exit. Harry unfolded Hermione's parchment, which showed the solution with the elegant brevity of someone who had solved it so completely they no longer found it interesting. The second smallest bottle, and for the return, the rounded bottle far left. He took the second smallest. Held it. It tasted like ice and the specific quiet of a winter night, and the flames parted, and he walked through. The mirror of Eriste stood at the end of a chamber that was lit by nothing he could identify, the light sourceless and even, and in front of the mirror, with his back to Harry and his hands pressed against it with the frantic focus of someone trying to get inside a locked thing, was Quirrell. Or had been Quirrell. Harry watched him for a moment from the doorway. The turban was off. The back of Quirrell's head, and the face pressed into the back of Quirrell's head, the flat serpentine face, the red eyes, the specific quality of something that existed at the wrong frequency, turned toward him with the slow deliberateness of something that had known he was coming. Harry Potter, said the voice from the back of Quirrell's head. Not the stammer, not Quirrell's own frightened tenor. This was older and colder and very, very certain of itself. At last. Hello, Harry said, walking into the room. Quirrell turned fully. His expression, his own expression, the real one beneath the months of performed fright, was the expression of a man so far past the point of his own original decisions that he couldn't identify the moment of wrong turning anymore. Exhausted and ashamed and also, somewhere deep in the exhaustion, still afraid. Still always afraid. You're smaller than I expected, the voice said. Not cruel, genuinely noting it. I expected something more. The boy who survived. The child the prophecy bothers about. You're very small. You're a face on the back of a man's head, Harry said pleasantly. We're both making do. The red eyes narrowed. You're not afraid. No. You should be afraid, the voice said, the certainty of it unchanged, the absolute conviction of a man who had spent half a century being the most frightening thing in every room. I am Lord Voldemort. I know what you are, Harry said. He stopped walking at 6 feet from Quirrell. I know all of it. The Horcruxes. The murders. The fragment of yourself sitting in this man's head and slowly killing him. He looked, not at the face but at Quirrell, at the exhausted human being on whom all of this rested. Quirinus, he said, using the man's first name deliberately, and watched Quirrell's eyes change when he did. How much of this was what you wanted? The fragment's voice sharpened. Do not address, I wasn't talking to you, Harry said, and there was something in his voice when he said it, something that had the quality of the realm behind it, the Judgment Hall and the 5 Rivers and the 1,000-Year Garden, and the fragment felt it, because the fragment flinched, which fragments of Voldemort almost never did. Quirrell's eyes, his own eyes, not the red, moved to Harry's face with the specific shock of someone who has not been addressed as themselves in longer than they can clearly remember. I went looking, Quirrell said, in a voice that was barely a voice, barely a whisper, his stammer completely gone in the way that stammers sometimes vanish under sufficient emotional weight, for power. I thought, he stopped. I thought if I was powerful enough, nothing could, he stopped again. Nothing could what? Harry said. The fragment tried to reassert. The cold thing pushed against Quirrell's throat, his jaw, trying to reclaim the voice, and Harry let it happen because he needed to see the geography of this, the specific architecture of the fragment's hold. Silence, the fragment said, in the older voice, reclaiming the mouth. You're wasting time, boy. The stone is in this mirror and I cannot reach it. You'll tell me how. No, Harry said. No. The certainty faltered slightly. Not lost, but adjusted, the recalibration of something encountering unexpected resistance in a place it hadn't anticipated resistance. You don't understand what I can, I understand exactly what you can do, Harry said. I've read about all of it. Every curse. Every death. Every Horcrux. He took one step closer. And I understand that you've been so afraid of the threshold your whole life that you've broken yourself trying to avoid it. You don't have a soul anymore. Not a complete one. What's in this man's head is a piece of a piece of a piece of something that was once a person. He looked at the red eyes. Tom Riddle was afraid of death. But at least Tom Riddle was a person. You're barely even that now. The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. The red eyes burned with the specific quality of something that has been named correctly and hates it. Give me the stone, the fragment said, quieter now, which was more frightening from it than the loud certainty had been, and I'll spare you. You're something unusual. I've been watching you all year. You're more than they know. Serve me, and I'll give you power greater than, I already have power greater than yours, Harry said, simply and without performance. I've had it since I was 9. I don't need yours. Another silence. Longer. Then, the fragment said, very quietly, I'll take it from you. Quirrell moved. Chapter 5, The Mirror Shows What the Living Want. Quirrell moved fast. Not his own speed, the fragment driving him, the cold thing pouring its will through borrowed limbs with the desperation of something that had been passive for too long and was done being patient. He crossed the 6 feet between them in 2 steps, hands up, the magic coming off him in the flat crackling wave of force without finesse, the kind of casting that didn't bother with wands because the power was sufficient to override the requirement for precision. Harry sidestepped. Not dramatically, just a half step left, enough that Quirrell's momentum carried him past, the force wave hitting the wall behind Harry and leaving a scorch mark the shape of an open hand. Harry turned to face him. You're faster than you look, the fragment said, through Quirrell's mouth. You're slower than you were, Harry said. 40 years ago you had a body. Now you're borrowing one that's already damaged. Quirrell turned. The red eyes calculating, reassessing, doing the thing a genuinely intelligent opponent does when a first approach fails, not panicking, not repeating, finding the new angle. You won't strike back, the fragment said. You've been standing there talking when you could have ended this already. Which means you want something. Yes, Harry said. The stone. No. Harry looked at Quirrell's face, at both faces on it, the exhausted human one and the flat cold passenger. I want him back. Queerness. What's left of him? He kept his voice level. The fragment is killing him. Every day it's in there it takes more of what he is. But he's still there. I can feel him. The red eyes went very still. You can't separate them, the fragment said. Not without destroying both. That's not true, Harry said. That's what you want him to believe. He took a step forward. You've been telling him that since Albania. That you're inseparable now. That he chose this and there's no way back. But you can only maintain the hold because he's afraid, and the reason he's afraid is because he believes you. He looked at Quirrell. Queerness. I know you can hear me. The fragment tried to seize the moment, rushed forward again, the flat force magic coming in 3 rapid pulses that Harry deflected not with his wand but with his free hand, the shadow step, stepping sideways through the space between the 2 states of a place that was both lit and dark simultaneously, the pulses going through where he'd been and into the chamber walls in bursts of pale fire. When he stepped back into the visible, he was 2 feet from Quirrell. Close enough. You're not what I am, the fragment said, and there was something different in the voice now, not the certainty, not anymore, but the specific quality of something that has begun to understand what it is facing and is processing that understanding through the only lens it has, which is threat. What are you? The son of Hades, Harry said. And Persephone. The god of thresholds. He met the red eyes without blinking. Every soul that crosses passes through what I am. Including yours. Including every piece of yours. Silence. The kind that follows a piece of information too large for an immediate response. That's not possible, the fragment said. The Greek pantheon is real, Harry said. Quite inconveniently real, from your perspective. The red eyes moved across his face with the focused desperate reading of something that is rebuilding its model of a situation in real time. Harry watched the moment the fragment decided to stop talking and commit fully, watched the decision happen in the quality of stillness before motion, the specific held quality of a thing gathering everything it has. It hit him with everything it had. The magic came off the fragment in a way that was different from the earlier force waves. This was not borrowed power filtered through Quirrell's limited channel, this was the fragment's core expression, the direct output of a soul shard that had been distilled through decades of fear and violence into something pure and cold and absolute. It hit Harry in the chest with the weight of a decision that had been made at the moment of Voldemort's first Horcrux and had never been questioned since, the full compressed force of I will not die, I will not cross, I will not be what everything alive must eventually be. Harry took the impact. He didn't move. His feet stayed on the stone floor of the chamber and the force broke around him the way a river breaks around a standing stone, not because he was harder than the force, but because he was older, because he existed at the substrate level, below the magical frequency that the force operated on, in the place where things like thresholds and boundaries and the permanent negotiation between living and dying had their foundations. The force had nothing to purchase against him because the purchase it needed was a fear of death, and Harry did not have that fear, had never had it, had been born without it and raised deeper into its absence every year. Quirrell staggered. The fragment's effort had cost the host. Quirrell's knees bent, his breathing changed, the thin frame showing the toll of channeling something that was genuinely too large for it. Harry walked forward and put his hand on Quirrell's arm. This was the gamble. The thing he'd been building toward, the piece the library had given him and Hecate's teaching had completed and months of watching Quirrell had confirmed. You didn't destroy the fragment with force. You moved it. You invited it across. And the invitation required contact, required the full expression of what Harry was, not the divine power that the fragment had just hit him with and failed against, but the older, quieter thing beneath it, the thing the shadows in the cupboard had recognized when Harry was 4 years old. The thing that was death, but from the inside. Not death as ending. Death as passage. The distinction that Voldemort had spent his entire adult life refusing to understand. He felt the fragment the moment his hand connected. It was, not comfortable. It was cold in the specific way of a thing that had been cold so long it had forgotten warmth was possible, a thing compressed by decades into a point of pure refusal. He felt Quirrell beneath it, the human being, the frightened scholar who had gone looking for power and found an ambush, and between the fragment and the human the specific geography of a possession, the fragment's tendrils in the host's mind, his fear, his voice, his will, everything slowly constricted and overridden. Harry didn't try to pull the fragment off. He opened. The way a door opens. Not pushing, not pulling, just removing the resistance. Becoming the passage that the fragment had been refusing to recognize existed. Letting the full warmth of the realm into this cold small space, the Akron hum and the asphodel glow and the thousand-year garden and the weight of everything that had ever crossed peacefully, not as a weapon but as an honest invitation. Here, he said, in no language, in the language that needed no translation. Here is where you go. Here is what it is. Look. The fragment looked. It had been refusing to look for decades. Every Horcrux had been an act of not looking, every murder a refusal, every year of clinging to the back of Quirrell's skull another form of turning away. But Harry was not offering it a choice between acceptance and refusal. He was simply showing it what was true, holding up the honest face of the threshold the fragment had spent its whole existence building walls against, and letting it see. What happened next was not dramatic. It was very quiet. The cold thing, the fragment, the piece of something that had been Tom Riddle, felt the truth of the threshold in a way that nothing Dumbledore or any wizard alive had ever been able to show it, because they had known it intellectually and Harry knew it constitutionally, had it in every cell, lived in it. The fragment felt the quality of what lay on the other side of the crossing. Not horror. Not emptiness. Just, arrival. The specific relief of a thing that has been resisting for very long finally encountering something it can stop resisting against. The fragment's cold began to dissolve. Quirrell gasped. His hands came up, not attacking, just the involuntary motion of someone whose body is suddenly, rapidly reclaiming itself, and he looked at Harry with eyes that were entirely his own for the first time since Albania, the red gone completely, and what was there was the human being, the frightened scholar, the man who'd made wrong choices out of the fear of being small. Quirrell said, in his own voice, the stammer back, his own natural voice back, thick with the shock of being in his own head. He's gone, Harry said. This piece of him is gone. Quirrell's legs gave out. Harry caught him, one arm, kept him upright, felt the man's weight and his heat and the specific vitality of someone whose body had just been given back to them. Quirrell was crying, though he didn't seem aware of it, the tears running down a face that looked 15 years older than it had in September. Can you stand? Harry asked. Yes, Quirrell said, and managed it, leaning against the wall. He looked at Harry with the dazed, stunned quality of someone emerging from something that had lasted so long they'd forgotten what before felt like. You're a child, he said, which was not the most relevant observation but was clearly the most immediate one. I'm a child who is also several other things, Harry said. He said, Quirrell swallowed. He told me you were, he was afraid of you. He didn't say why. He kept watching you all year and he wouldn't. His eyes went to the mirror of Eriste, which had been standing silent and enormous through all of this, its gold frame catching the sourceless light of the chamber. He wanted the stone. I know, Harry said. He would have been, Quirrell stopped. The full weight of what he'd been complicit in was landing, Harry could see it, not the landing of a man who didn't know, but the landing of a man who had known and turned away and was now, without the fragment's cold voice keeping his fear manageable, faced with himself. I helped him. I let him in. I went to Albania looking for, he put his hands over his face briefly. I wanted to be more than I was. I know, Harry said. That doesn't, no, Harry agreed. It doesn't excuse it. But it explains it. And explaining it is where you start, if you want to start. Quirrell looked at him from behind his hands. You're 11 years old, he said, not with dismissal but with a kind of bewildered awe. Technically, Harry said. What happens from here is up to you and Dumbledore and the Ministry. I have no interest in making it worse than it is. But Quirrell, he looked at the man. The fragment I just moved was one piece of him. There are more. Wherever they are, they need to be found and dealt with. I'll deal with them, when the time comes. But you have information. What he told you, where he'd been, what he said about the others. He paused. If you're willing. Quirrell was silent for a moment. Something moved through his expression, the complex motion of a man deciding what kind of person he's going to be now that the thing compelling him is gone. It wasn't a fast decision and it wasn't an easy one, Harry could see both facts clearly, and he waited with the patience of someone who understood that the right decision made slowly was more durable than the easy decision made quickly. Yes, Quirrell said, finally. I'm willing. Harry nodded. He turned to the mirror of Eriste. The great gold-framed glass stood against the far wall, the inscription across its top, Eriste stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi, legible both as its mirror script original and as what it spelled reversed, which Harry had worked out the first time he'd read about it. The mirror of Eriste showed not what you had but what you most deeply wanted. He looked into it. He'd expected something. Some great desire, some deep wanting revealed by the mirror's magic, a vision of himself at the center of some important future, the kind of thing the mirror tended to show people, according to the theory of it, the most compressed version of the self's most private wish. He saw Persephone's garden. The dark garden in the underworld, the luminescent flowers and the old water light and the stone bench where he'd sat when the realm had rung like a bell and made him what he was. Hades at the desk in the study. Hermes appearing through a window with something ridiculous and unnecessary and gift-shaped. Tysus on a warm stone. Ron at a chess board with the focused clear expression. Hermione with a book and the suppressed smile. Neville with his hands in soil, growing something, the specific satisfaction of someone discovering their actual power. All of it at once. Not sequential. The same. He thought, the mirror shows what the living want. What they're afraid they don't have. He looked at the image, everyone, all of it, the underworld and the mortal world and the brief brilliant lives of his friends. He thought, I have all of this. The mirror is showing me that I have all of this. He felt, in the vision, the weight of and they'll age, and die, and cross, and I'll still be here, which was the other side of what he had. Not a terror. A weight. The honest weight of what immortality among mortals meant. He held it. Let it be real, the way Persephone had taught him to let things be real. Then he looked at the base of the mirror, where the stone was. He'd worked out Dumbledore's protection while reading in the library. The mirror showing the desire rather than the thing meant that someone who wanted to use the stone would see themselves using it, would never find the actual object. But someone who wanted to find it, who had no desire for the stone itself, would see themselves finding it, and the mirror would give it to them. Harry had no desire for the philosopher's stone. He was already immortal. The stone's offer, extended life, the elixir, meant nothing to him. He wanted to secure it, which was different, and the mirror recognized the difference. The stone appeared in the reflection of his pocket. Harry put his hand in his pocket and his fingers closed around something solid, cold, and small. He brought it out. It sat in his palm, blood-red and dense, small enough to fit in a closed fist, radiating the specific warmth of concentrated alchemical work, centuries of Nicholas Flamel's most focused effort compressed into a stone the size of a large marble. He could feel its nature, not divine, nothing so permanent, but extraordinary human work. The closest mortal magic had ever come to the threshold Harry lived at. He held it for a moment. Felt its frequency, its age, the specific sadness of a thing made by people who were afraid of crossing. Then he closed his hand around it and looked at Quirrell. Can you walk? Harry said. Yes, Quirrell said. He was still against the wall, pale and diminished, but his eyes were clear and his voice was his own. Where are we? Up, Harry said. Ron is waiting. Hermione too. We're going to Dumbledore. He'll want to know everything, Harry agreed. And you're going to tell him. All of it. He looked at Quirrell with the directness he used for things that mattered. I'll be there when you do. I'll tell him what I know. You won't be alone in it. Quirrell looked at him. The bewilderment was still there, but beneath it something else had begun, tentative, barely present, the specific quality of a person who has been told there is a way forward and has chosen to believe it experimentally, on trial, the first early roots of something that might eventually become hope. Why? Quirrell said. Because you asked for help by going to Albania for it, Harry said. You just asked in the wrong place. They came up through the protections in reverse. Ron was exactly where he'd said he'd be, sitting on a white chess piece with his elbows on his knees, and his expression when Harry came through the door, followed by Quirrell, which was not on the list of expected outcomes Ron had apparently been running, went through 3 distinct phases: relief, surprise, recalibration. That's Professor Quirrell, Ron said. Yes, Harry said. Ron looked at Quirrell, at the absence of the turban, at the man's general quality of someone who had been through a significant amount very recently. He looks different. He is different, Harry said. Come on. Hermione met them at the trapdoor with Fluffy still asleep behind the door, the harp charm she'd apparently maintained through some extended application of will and ingenuity, and her expression when she saw Quirrell was the expression she wore when confronted with a phenomenon that her model of events hadn't included. She processed it in approximately 4 seconds and then said, "Are you all right?" To both Harry and Quirrell in the same breath, which Harry thought was very Hermione. "Yes," Harry said. Quirrell said, and stopped. He looked at Hermione and Ron with the slightly dazed quality of a man who had forgotten what regular people looked like and was encountering them again. "Yes," he managed. "I think so." "Good," Hermione said, and held the harp charm open with the focused precision of someone refusing to let anything else go wrong tonight. They went up. Harry kept his hand on the stone the entire way. Dumbledore met them at the end of the third-floor corridor. He was standing in the hallway in his dressing gown, which should have made him look less formidable but didn't, because Albus Dumbledore in a dressing gown at 2 in the morning was still Albus Dumbledore in a hallway he'd been headmaster of for 37 years, which meant the hallway arranged itself around him regardless of what he was wearing. His eyes took in the group, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Quirrell, in one long sweep. His expression moved through things too quickly and too privately for Harry to catalogue all of them, but what settled on his face was something Harry hadn't seen there before. Not surprise, too old for that. Something more like the expression of a man who has been proven right about something he'd hoped to be wrong about, and wrong about something he'd thought he'd got right, and is being asked to sit with both simultaneously. "Harry," he said. "Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore's eyes went to the stone, visible in Harry's open hand. Then to Quirrell, who met the headmaster's gaze with the specific courage of someone doing the first genuinely brave thing they've done in years. Then back to Harry. "The stone," Dumbledore said. "Here," Harry said, and offered it. Dumbledore looked at it in Harry's palm for a long moment without taking it. "It's safe," he said, not quite asking. "The fragment that wanted it is gone," Harry said. "Voldemort is diminished by it. He still has others, Horcruxes, and they'll need dealing with. But not tonight." He kept his hand extended. "Tonight, the stone." Dumbledore took it. His hand closed around it and his expression did something very quiet and very human, the relief of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has been allowed, for a moment, to set it down. "I should have," he began. "You did what you could with what you understood," Harry said. "Not graciously, not coldly, plainly. Some of your understanding was wrong. We can correct that." "We," Dumbledore said, and looked at him with the blue eyes that were very old and, Harry thought, somewhat less certain of themselves than they'd been in September, which was an improvement. "You keep saying that." "Because I keep meaning it," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at Quirrell. "Quirinus," he said, and his voice was grave and not unkind, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years as a teacher and had learned to hear the student in anyone, even the ones who had gone far wrong. "Will you come to my office?" "Yes," Quirrell said. He was steadier now than he'd been in the chamber, each step away from the chamber seemed to solidify him, the way a person warms up slowly when they've been cold for a very long time. There's a great deal I should have told someone a long time ago." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I suspect there is." He looked at Harry over Quirrell's head. What passed between them in that look was not comfortable and was not uncomplicated, the full weight of a year's worth of events and the specific question of how much of what had happened tonight had been within Dumbledore's plan, and the honest answer to that question, which was, very little of it. Nothing of it, perhaps. But something else was there too. Below the discomfort, below the recalibration and the rueful revision of a plan that had met an 11-year-old and discovered it was insufficient. Something that was closer to what Dumbledore actually was when you stripped back the careful architecture he'd built around himself, a man who loved this world and was deeply, privately relieved that the thing he'd built to protect it was still standing, even if the builder's role in that outcome had been considerably smaller than he'd planned. "The stone," Dumbledore said, "will need to be dealt with properly. Nicholas and I have discussed, he stopped. Start it again. I'll handle it. You should rest. His eyes moved to Ron and Hermione. All three of you. You were, he appeared to find the adequate phrase difficult. You were remarkably brave. We were practical, Hermione said, which was possibly the most Hermione thing she'd said all year. Brave and practical, Ron said, same thing. Dumbledore looked at them both with the specific expression Harry had seen him use only twice before, the expression that was actually just undisguised fondness, not managed or performed, just present. Yes, he said. I suppose it is. Go. They went. Harry went to the hospital wing in the morning because Madame Pomfrey discovered what had happened before breakfast through means that Harry assumed involved the specific network of information that ran through every school, faster and more comprehensive than any formal reporting system. She was brisk and thorough and didn't ask questions about the specifics of how he was doing, which Harry appreciated. She simply ran her diagnostic spells with the efficiency of a woman who had been doing this for 30 years and found the most sensible response to things was always to check whether they were physically intact. He was. She gave him chocolate, which he accepted with the appropriate gravity chocolate deserved, and released him. Ron and Hermione were already at breakfast when he arrived. The Great Hall had the specific quality of a morning after a significant thing, not knowing what the significant thing was but aware of the residue of it, slightly quieter than usual, the older students watching the first years with the assessing attention of people who had noticed that things had happened and were trying to work out the shape of it. Harry sat down, poured himself tea, and ate breakfast with the settled ease of someone who had slept well and found the morning entirely manageable. Right, Ron said, when Harry had been eating for 3 minutes. What happened in there? After the chess. I'll tell you everything, Harry said. Now. Hermione said. Not in the Great Hall, Harry said. Tonight. In the common room, after everyone's gone to bed. I'll tell you both everything, properly. Hermione and Ron exchanged a look, the developing private communication of three people who had started to understand each other's shorthand. Then Hermione nodded, the considered nod of someone who is accepting a reasonable timeline while reserving the right to find it trying. Tonight, she agreed. Quirrell won't, Ron started. He's alive, Harry said. He'll recover. He had more choices taken from him than he made himself, at least toward the end. He paused. He's going to need help. Dumbledore will help him, I think. The right kind. Ron absorbed this with the practical human generosity that was one of his best qualities, the ability to update his perception of a person based on new information without making a performance of the update. Right, he said, and went back to his eggs. Neville appeared at the end of the bench with the slightly uncertain look he still sometimes wore when approaching group conversations, though it was less uncertain than it had been in September, which was one of the year's better developments. Are you? He started. Fine, Harry said. Sit down, Neville. Neville sat. He looked at Harry with the careful attention he'd developed, not the flat observation of someone watching a spectacle but the engaged attention of someone who considered what they saw and filed it against what they knew. You did something, he said. Last night. I don't know what but the castle feels different. Harry looked at him. What do you mean? Neville frowned, searching for language. He did this when he was trying to describe something he felt but hadn't found the vocabulary for yet, and Harry waited with the patience he gave everything worth waiting for. Like a headache going away, Neville said finally. Like the building had a headache all year and now it doesn't. Harry looked at the ceiling. The enchanted sky, morning clouds moving over October blue. The castle around him, old, layered, complicated, and yes, different from yesterday, the specific quality of a place from which something wrong has been removed. He hadn't thought about Neville feeling it, hadn't predicted that Neville's relationship with the castle was deep enough to register the change. Neville noticed more than anyone gave him credit for. Harry thought this needed to be said more often and more clearly. Yes, Harry said. Something was wrong and now it isn't. The castle is better for it. Neville nodded. He reached for the toast with the decisive motion of someone who has asked their question and received a straight answer and can now proceed with breakfast, and Harry thought, there it is. That's who he's going to be. The person who noticed things others missed, who felt the quality of the world around him with a sensitivity he hadn't been trained out of yet. It was going to be extraordinary, when he learned to trust it. Neville, Harry said. Neville looked up. The herbology exam results come back next week, Harry said. You got the highest mark in the practical. Neville stared at him. How do you know that? McGonagall told Sprout and Sprout mentioned it to the Hufflepuff head and the Hufflepuff head mentioned it to the painting outside the herbology corridor, Harry said, which was the true but not complete answer. The complete answer involved the castle telling him, the way the castle occasionally told him things now, having decided at some point in autumn that Harry was trustworthy enough to share its information with. It's an impressive mark. The practical is just, Neville started, then stopped, doing the recalibration of someone who has always assumed any success they have is specifically the easier kind, the fluke kind, the not really counting kind. It's just practical work, he said. Which you're excellent at, Harry said. The written theory is just the language for describing what you already know physically. You'll get there. Neville looked at him for a moment with the expression that Harry had been waiting all year for, the one on the other side of the chronic self-diminishment, the one that was just possibility, plain and unqualified. Then it went back under, because old habits were persistent, but it had been there, and Harry noted it carefully. It would come back. Things that were real always came back. The week before end-of-year exams had the specific atmosphere of a building that had decided to be urgent. Library tables vanished under books. Hermione was visible in every studying location in the castle simultaneously, which was not actually true but felt observationally accurate. Ron had developed a method of studying that involved walking in circles around the common room table talking at his notes, which he claimed helped him remember things and which Harry privately thought was true based on watching it work. Harry studied with them. Not because he needed to for the exams, his exam performance was going to be fine, the knowledge was there and it was only a matter of expressing it in the format the assessments required, but because studying with Ron and Hermione was one of the better things about his life at Hogwarts, a discovery he hadn't anticipated. The rhythm of three people working through something together, the way Hermione's rigor and Ron's instinct and Harry's deep structure understanding circled the same problems from different angles and produced between them something better than any one of them produced alone. He was in the library on the Wednesday before exams when Draco Malfoy sat down across from him. Not quietly, Malfoy did very little quietly, operating on the assumption that arrivals should be noticed, but not aggressively either. He set his books down and looked at Harry with the specific expression he used for people he decided were worth direct attention, which Harry had noticed he deployed rarely and without the casual cruelty he aimed at people he considered beneath consideration. Potter, Malfoy said. Malfoy, Harry said. You did something last week, Malfoy said. Something significant. The whole school knows something happened, they just don't know what. Things happen, Harry said. Not like that, Malfoy said. Harry had observed all year, a finely tuned sensor for the quality of significant events. Growing up in Lucius Malfoy's house had done that, the constant reading of the room, the assessment of where power was and where it was moving. Quirrell's been in the hospital wing. He'll leave before the end of term, they say. The defense position will need filling. Probably, Harry said. And whatever was under the third floor, Malfoy, Harry said. What are you actually asking? Draco looked at him. He had the pale, composed face of a boy who had been taught that composure was everything and was young enough that the teaching sometimes slipped, and in the slipping you could see the person underneath, less certain than the performance, more curious, considerably more conflicted about the things more actions right the next chapter now that AI chat 5-hour limit reached. More actions Claude Sonnet 4.